So hey, what's up guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. So in this video we are going to see what if Harry Potter was raised by Ragnarok and had frost giant Patronus. So this will be movie, and if you want more movies and videos like this, then please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget to check out my other videos. So let's jump right
People who
into the
survived the
video.
end of worlds didn't talk about it like a story. They talked about it like weather. They said the sky cracked and never apologized. They said the oceans boiled and then froze, like the world couldn't decide whether to scream or fall silent. They said fire didn't just burn. Fire ate names. Cities became shadows, gods became rumors. Monsters became hungry and heroes became tired. And in the middle of that, when the last horn was blown and the last brave thing was done, something small cried. Not a warrior. Not a king, a baby. The sound was thin, sharp, stubborn. It cut through ash and snow like a needle through cloth. It didn't belong there. Nothing soft belonged there. But it existed anyway, and existence was a kind of rebellion. The one who heard it was not a god. Not anymore. He moved through the ruins like a man who had forgotten how to fear. His cloak had once been red. Now it was soot black with white crust along the seams. His hands were scarred with old runes, carved into skin not inked. The kind of marks you made when you had nothing left to bargain with except your own blood. He stopped near a collapsed stone arch that used to be a gate. The ground around it was split open as if a giant had struck the earth with a hammer. The air tasted of metal and burned wood. Then the cry came again. The man crouched, listening. The snow was not gentle here. It came sideways, thin and sharp as broken glass. Ash floated down between flakes, turning the world gray. In the distance, the last fires of the apocalypse still smoldered, refusing to die like stubborn hatred. The man found the baby in a hollow where the ground had folded inward, sheltered by a ring of cracked stone. The child was wrapped in torn cloth that should have been gone, should have burned. But if the end taught you anything, it was that should meant nothing. A scar marked the baby's forehead, lightning-shaped, angry red against pale skin. The man's eyes narrowed. Huh, he murmured, voice rough with cold. So you're one of those. He had seen wounds like that before. Not on children, not often. Scars that weren't accidents, but signatures, marks left by magic that had tried to kill and failed. The baby's eyes were open, bright, unblinking. Not the sleepy, unfocused gaze of most infants. This was a stare that belonged on someone older, someone who had already learned one important fact about life. If you stop watching, you die. The man held his breath, waiting for the world to punish him for noticing something fragile. Nothing happened. No lightning, no divine judgment. Just wind, ash, snow, and the child's steady, stubborn breathing, white mist that curled from his mouth in perfect little spirals, as if cold itself knew him. The man reached down. The baby didn't flinch. That was the first thing the man understood. Whatever this child had crawled out of, it had already taught him that fear was a luxury. He lifted the baby into his arms. The child was too light, like he had been carved from bone and hunger. The man tucked him under his cloak. For a moment, warmth met warmth, human heat against infant skin. The baby sighed, and the air around them dropped a few degrees. The man froze, then laughed quietly, as if the universe had finally told a joke worth hearing. Well, he said, and his voice softened. You're not meant to die easily, are you? He began to walk. Behind him, the ruins groaned. Somewhere far off, something enormous shifted in the smoke, like a mountain waking up. But the man didn't look back. He had spent his whole life looking back at disasters. It never helped. He only tightened his grip on the child, and the child, scar on his forehead, frost in his breath, clutched a fistful of the man's cloak as if anchoring himself to the only solid thing left in the universe. The shelter was a cave carved into the side of a shattered hill. It wasn't warm. Nothing was warm. But it was still, which was better than warmth most days. Inside, there were signs of someone trying to keep living stacked stones, a fire pit lined with blackened bones, bundles of dried moss, a narrow shelf holding a few items that had survived the end. A broken cup, a dagger, a strip of leather, and a small stone etched with runes. The man laid the baby down on a bed of fur that used to belong to something much larger. The child stared up at him, silent now. "What are you?" the man asked, and then he shook his head as if the question itself offended him. "No. Better question." He sat beside the child, pulled off one glove, and placed 2 fingers lightly on the lightning scar. It pulsed, not painfully, not like a wound, like a heartbeat that wasn't the child's. The man's expression turned serious. "You're bound," he said, "to something that tried to claim you. But you didn't break." The baby blinked once, slow. The man leaned back against the cave wall and exhaled. Outside, the storm screamed. The end of the world kept trying to finish its sentence. Inside, the man spoke the first words of a vow he hadn't planned to make. "Listen," he told the baby, voice low as if the darkness might steal the sound. "If you live here, you live by rules. Not because rules are kind, because rules keep your bones inside your skin." The baby's tiny fingers flexed, reaching toward him. The man hesitated, then offered his hand. The baby grabbed one finger with surprising strength. The man swallowed. "Rule 1, he said. "Breathe slow. Fast breath is panic. Panic kills." The baby stared, as if memorizing the sound. "Rule 2. Waste nothing. Heat food words. Waste none of it." The baby made a sound, not a cry, almost a hum. "Roll 3. The man looked down at the tiny hand holding his finger. So small, so breakable. And yet the grip was fierce. He thought of the things he had seen, things that crushed armies and laughed while doing it. Then he said the last rule like he was carving it into stone. "Protect the small." The baby's grip tightened, and for 1 second, just one, the cave brightened. Faintly, like moonlight had found its way through all the smoke and ash. The man stared into the darkness outside. He didn't know why this child had arrived in the ashes of Ragnarok. He only knew one thing: the end of the world had delivered him a beginning. Time in ruined worlds moved strangely. Days were measured by hunger, not sun. Nights were measured by how long the wind screamed. The baby grew. Slowly at first, then like something had flipped inside him, a clock that had been waiting to start. He learned to crawl across stone without tearing his knees. He learned to sleep with one ear open. He learned to listen for the difference between the wind and something moving through it. The man, who the boy came to call Raffen, because it was the first name he heard spoken with any certainty, taught him without tenderness, but not without care. Hraf didn't hand out comfort like candy. He handed out survival like bread, hard, plain, necessary. When the boy was old enough to stand, Raffen took him outside and made him learn the shape of cold. "Cold isn't the enemy," he told him, voice muffled by scarf and storm. "Cold is honest. It tells you what you are. Weak things shatter. Strong things endure. Smart things learn when to retreat." The boy, Harry, stood in waist-deep snow, shivering but stubborn. "I'm not retreating," he said through chattering teeth. Raffen's eyes flicked to him. "Good," he said. "Then learn to pay for that choice." Harry learned. Every stubborn decision had a cost. Sometimes the cost was bruises. Sometimes the cost was hunger. Sometimes it was the ache in his bones that lasted for days. But he paid anyway. Because when you were raised in the shadow of an apocalypse, the idea of quitting felt like betrayal. Raffen taught him runes next, simple ones carved into stone with a knife tip. For thorn, pain that warns. For home, shelter that holds. For protection, a barrier that stands even when you're tired. Harry carved them with clumsy hands at first, then cleaner, then precise. "You carve like you mean it," Hraf said, watching. "Runes don't obey half-truths." Harry nodded, eyes narrowed in concentration. He didn't understand magic the way wizards did. He didn't know about wands or Latin words or polite spells. He understood something older: intent, price, result. That was how the world worked. That was how he worked. On the night Harry first saw the giant, he was 7. They were out late because hunger had made the decision for them. Hraf had tracked a wounded stag, too thin, limping, doomed anyway. In better times, it would have lived. In the ashes of Ragnarok, mercy was letting it end quickly. Harry followed behind, small enough to slip between broken rocks, quiet enough to make the storm forget he existed. Then the ground shook. Not an earthquake. Not random. A rhythm, heavy, slow, certain. Raffen's head snapped up. His hand went to the dagger at his belt. He motioned for Harry to get down. Harry obeyed without question, flattening himself behind a slab of blackened stone. The footsteps came closer. Snow drifted down from the air, swirling strangely, like the storm itself was bowing, and then Harry saw it, a shape through smoke and frost, too tall, too broad. Not a man, not even close. A giant moved across the ridge, its silhouette carved from darkness and pale starlight. Each step sank deep into the snow, leaving craters where a person would leave footprints. Its breath rolled out in clouds like blizzards being born. Harry's heart hammered, but he did not scream. He watched. The giant's head turned slightly, as if it could feel eyes on it. Harry's fingers dug into the snow. For one terrible second, he was sure the giant would come down the ridge and crush them both without effort, but the giant didn't. It paused and looked away. As it moved, Harry caught a glimpse of its face. Ancient, severe, not cruel but indifferent like winter. Like a mountain, like the laws of nature wearing skin. Then it was gone, swallowed by storm and ash. Hrafn let out a long breath he had been holding. Harry didn't move. What was that? He whispered. Hrafn stared at the ridge, expression unreadable. A remnant, he said finally. A memory that walks. Harry's voice came out smaller than he wanted. Was it going to kill us? Hrafn looked down at him. Then very carefully, he said, "Not tonight." Harry swallowed. His lungs felt too tight, like the cold had crawled inside them. Why? Hrafn's eyes sharpened. Because it didn't see prey, he said. It saw a vow? Harry didn't understand. Not fully. But he felt something in his bones that night. A recognition as cold and clear as ice. The giant hadn't felt like a monster. It had felt like a guardian. Back in the cave, Harry couldn't sleep. He sat up, staring at the small rune stone on the shelf, the one Raph kept separate from everything else, the one with deep carvings and faint silver lines in the cracks. Raph noticed. Of course, he always noticed. You saw it? Raph said quietly from his corner. Harry nodded. Was it evil? Harry asked, testing the word like it didn't belong in his mouth. Hrafn's laugh was soft and humorless. Evil is a story people tell when they don't want to learn the details, he said. That thing is winter given shape. Winter isn't evil. Winter is just honest. Harry stared at the fire pit where embers glowed faintly. Then why do people fear it? He asked. Hrafn leaned forward, elbows on knees, gaze steady. Because it doesn't pretend to be gentle, he said, and because it doesn't care if you beg. Harry's jaw tightened. What if I made it care? He asked, sudden and fierce. Raft studied him for a long moment, then reached out and placed a hand on Harry's shoulder, heavy and grounding. You don't make winter care? He said. You become the kind of person winter respects. Harry's hands curled into fists. How? Hrafn's voice lowered into something like a ritual. Endure, he said, and when you can, protect. That is how power stays clean. Harry repeated the words in his head until they felt carved into him. Endure. Protect. Keep the small alive. Outside, the wind screamed like a dying god. Inside, a boy with a lightning scar and frost in his breath made a promise without knowing the world would one day demand proof. And far away, beyond smoke and ash, a giant-shaped shadow moved through the storm, silent, watchful, like something ancient had noticed a new name being written into fate. The first time Harry saw a real summer, he thought the sky looked wrong. It wasn't gray. It wasn't bruised with smoke. It didn't spit ash like a wounded beast. It was bright. So bright it felt suspicious, like someone had painted it to trick him. Hrafn watched him squint at the open blue and gave a small snort. Don't stare, he said. Even gentle things can blind you. Harry lowered his gaze, but he couldn't stop listening. The wind here didn't scream. It sighed. Leaves moved on branches with a soft, living rustle. The air smelled like dirt and grass instead of char and iron. There were birds. Actual birds. Calling to each other as if the world was normal. Normal. Harry rolled the word around in his head like a stone. It didn't fit. They had been moving for days. Away from the worst ruins. Away from the places where the ground still remembered the end. Raph never explained how they traveled between worlds, or whether they had crossed into something new. He simply walked, and the land slowly changed. Harry had learned not to ask questions that didn't keep you alive. But then the letter came. It didn't arrive like a normal thing. Because Harry didn't live in a normal place. The cave was gone now. They camped in old forests, in abandoned shacks, in places where people had once lived and then vanished. Raph said those places still had shape. The idea of shelter. That idea helped. On the morning the letter arrived, Harry woke before Hafn as usual. He crawled out from under his blanket and checked the fire pit. The embers were almost dead. Harry cupped his hands and leaned in to coax warmth out of nothing. A faint spark jumped, and then the embers flared. Not into a roaring blaze. Harry couldn't do that. Not yet, but into a small, steady heat, enough to keep fingers from stiffening. He liked that. Useful control. Then a sound came from the trees. Fluttering wings, rapid, panicked. Harry turned sharply. A barn owl burst through the branches like it had been chased. It circled once overhead, confused, then dove toward the camp and landed on the log beside Harry. It stared at him with wide golden eyes and held out a letter. Harry didn't move. He watched the owl carefully, assessing like Hraf had taught him. The bird didn't look hostile, but it looked determined, like it had a job and would die before failing it. Harry reached out slowly, and the owl didn't flinch. The letter was thick parchment, sealed with red wax. The address was written in neat green ink. Mr. Harry Potter, the camp near the broken oak. Somewhere unregistered. Harry's stomach tightened. He looked around the forest. No one was there, yet someone had found him. Hrafn's boots crunched behind him. Harry didn't jump. He had long ago trained that instinct out of his body, but his shoulders tensed. Hrafn took one look at the owl, then the letter, and his face turned to stone. "Ah," he said softly. "So the civilized world finally remembered you exist?" Harry didn't know what civilized world meant, not properly. He knew there were places with rules and walls, and people who didn't sharpen knives before they spoke. Places where you didn't have to measure your breath, but he'd never lived in them. Hrafn sat on the log opposite him. The owl tilted its head and blinked like it approved of the arrangement. Harry held the letter in both hands. "It has my name," he said. Hrafn's eyes were sharp. "Yes." "How?" Hrafn's mouth twitched. Not a smile, but something close. "Because you are not as hidden as you think," he said. "And because some forms of magic don't forget. They hunt." Harry's fingers tightened around the parchment. He glanced at the scar on his forehead as if it might answer him. It didn't. Hrafn nodded at the seal. "Open it." Harry hesitated. In the Ash world, paper meant nothing. Messages were shouted across storms or carved into stone. A letter felt delicate, dangerously so, like it was a trap disguised as manners. But the owl didn't move, it just waited. Harry broke the seal. The parchment unfurled with a crisp sound that made Harry think of ice cracking. He read silently, lips moving. HGRCL FITCH ANDSARDRY Headmaster Albus Dumbledore Order of Merlin First Class Grand Sork Chef Warlock Supreme Mugwump International Confid. Of wizards London smelled, like too many people pretending they weren't afraid. Harry stood at the edge of a crowded street with Hraf beside him, and for the first time in his life he understood what noise truly was, not the scream of a storm, but the constant, careless roar of civilization. Wheels on stone. Voices overlapping. Footsteps that didn't stalk or hunt, just moved because they could. Harry kept his shoulders square and his eyes sharp. He watched everything. Hraf did not blend in. He wore simple clothes, but he carried himself like a man who had once argued with gods and survived the debate. People stepped around him without knowing why. The letter had led them here, not by magic compass or prophecy, by instructions. A name, a place, a time. King's Cross Station. Harry stared up at it like it was a fortress built for a different kind of war. Inside, it was heat and bodies and rushed impatience. Hraf walked with steady purpose, ignoring the tide. Harry stayed close, instincts pulling his gaze to exits, shadows, anything that could become a threat. And then Harry felt it. A pull behind his scar. Not pain, something worse. Recognition, like a hook in bone. He touched his forehead without meaning to. Hraf noticed, of course. "Don't scratch it," he muttered. "Marks like that enjoy attention." Harry lowered his hand, jaw tight. They reached the platform barrier. People streamed through, vanishing, reappearing. A trick? A hidden door. Harry understood hidden doors. He had lived inside them. Hrafen paused. Harry glanced up. We'll go through. Hrafn's eyes narrowed. We do, but remember this. His voice dropped. The moment you step into their world, their rules will try to shape you. Harry swallowed. And if I don't let them? Hrafn's mouth curved faintly. Then they will call you dangerous. Harry nodded once. That was fine. Dangerous wasn't new. They walked straight at the barrier. Harry's stomach clenched, an instinctive brace for impact, and the stone dissolved into cool mist around his skin. On the other side, the world changed. Scarlet train, steam, a platform full of witches and wizards in cloaks, trunts, cats, owls, voices bright with excitement. So much life, so much softness. Harry stood still, overwhelmed for exactly one heartbeat. Then his survival training snapped back into place and reorganized the chaos into patterns, groups, angles, exits, threats. He saw it immediately. Some eyes slid over him without caring. Some eyes lingered, and a few, just a few, paused too long on his scar, as if it was a trophy hanging on his forehead. Hrafn moved a half step closer, subtly placing himself between Harry and the worst of the staring. Not protective like a shield. Protective like a knife at your back. Go, Hrafn said. Harry moved. A woman with kind eyes, too kind, Harry thought suspiciously, smiled at him as they passed. First year? Harry didn't answer. Hrafn answered for him with a flat, polite tone that sounded like he was translating from a language older than manners. Yes. The woman's gaze flicked over Hrafn, then back to Harry's scar. Her smile wavered. Curiosity and caution warred in her face. Good luck, she said quickly, as if luck was a charm you could hand someone and walk away. Harry watched her leave. Why did she look at me like that? He asked quietly. Hrafn's eyes stayed on the crowd. Because they've told your stories so many times, they've forgotten you're a person. Harry's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. He didn't like that. The train ride was strange. People laughed too loudly, shared sweets, complained about homework before they'd even started. Harry sat by the window and watched the countryside blur past. Green fields, rolling hills, soft clouds. A world that hadn't ended. A world that didn't know how close it had come to being ash. Hrafn sat opposite him, silent and alert. He didn't belong here, and he didn't pretend to. At one point, a boy with pale hair and a practiced smirk leaned into their compartment doorway like he owned it. He took one look at Harry's scar and smiled wider. Well, the boy drawled, so it's true. You really are. Hrafn's gaze flicked to him, sharp as a blade drawn slowly. The boy faltered mid-sentence, like the air had suddenly become too cold to breathe. Harry didn't move. He didn't threaten. He just looked at the boy the way he'd looked at predators in the Ash world, measuring. The boy's smirk weakened. I'm Malfoy, he said, trying again, voice smaller than he intended. Draco Malfoy. Harry waited. When the boy realized Harry wasn't going to offer a name back, he tried to laugh it off. You don't talk much, do you? Harry answered calmly, because calm was a weapon. I talk when it matters. The boy swallowed. For 1 second, the temperature in the compartment dipped. Frost formed in a thin lace pattern along the bottom edge of the window, then vanished as quickly as it appeared. Hrafn didn't react outwardly, but Harry saw the slight tightening in his guardian's jaw. The boy backed out of the doorway, forcing a chuckle that sounded like fear in disguise. Right. Well, see you at school. When he was gone, Harry looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. I didn't mean to do that, he said. Hrafn's voice was quiet. You didn't mean to warn him. Harry frowned. I didn't mean to change the air. Hrafn held his gaze. Power answers to intent, Harry. Always, whether you notice or not. Harry's stomach sank slightly. So if I'm angry, then your magic will speak your anger, Hrafn finished, and the world will listen. Harry nodded slowly, absorbing that like a rule carved in stone. Hogwarts rose from the lake like a promise too big to trust. The castle was beautiful in the way mountains were beautiful. Impressive, ancient, and utterly unconcerned with whether you belonged. Harry stepped onto the shore with the other first years, cloak fluttering in the night wind. The water was black and cold, and for a moment it reminded him of home, A tall woman with a stern face called for them to line up. Harry lined up. He could feel eyes again. He could always feel eyes now. Some were curious. Some were excited. Some, quiet, sharp, held the same expression he'd seen in London. I know your story. He hated that expression. They entered the great hall. Heat rolled over Harry like a physical force. Firelight, warm air, 100 candles floating in the air as if gravity was a suggestion. The ceiling showed a starry sky that wasn't real but was convincing enough to make Harry's chest feel tight. Warmth should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap. Raffen was gone now, sent away by the school staff with polite insistence. Harry had watched him leave with a strange hollow in his ribs, like a shield being removed. Raffen had only said one thing before disappearing into the corridor: remember the rules. Harry remembered. Breathe slow. Waste nothing. Protect the small. Then the sorting hat was placed on a stool. One by one, names were called. One by one, children were judged. When Harry's name rang through the hall, Harry Potter, the room shifted. A hush that wasn't quiet, but listening. Harry walked forward without hurrying, without hesitating. Survival didn't allow hesitation. He sat on the stool, the hat dropped over his eyes. Darkness. Then a voice in his head, old worn, surprised. Well, that's unusual. Harry didn't startle. He had lived with weirder. So much cold, the hat murmured. Not emptiness. Not cruelty. Cold like a vow. Harry's jaw tightened. I'm not cold. But even as he thought it, he remembered the frost on the train window. The way the air responded. The hat hummed thoughtfully. You could be brave, it said. But you don't crave applause. You could be cunning, but you don't crave control. You could be wise, but you don't crave detachment. You crave. It paused as if tasting his mind. Survival. And protection. Harry's throat tightened. The hat's tone sharpened. And you hate being owned. Harry's fingers curled slightly. Yes. The hat seemed to sigh. You'd burn too bright in Gryffindor. Too many eyes expecting a hero. Ravenclaw would try to study you until you forget you're human. Hufflepuff would be kind, but kindness makes you restless. Harry's heartbeat sped up despite his training. Slytherin. The hat said softly, almost reluctantly. Not for darkness, for steel, for knowing the price of choices. Harry heard the unspoken warning. They will misunderstand you there. He didn't care. Misunderstanding was familiar. S.L.Y. The hat shouted. The great hall erupted. Applause. Whispers. A few gasps. Harry removed the hat and walked to the Slytherin table. As he sat, the candlelight flickered. Not much. Just enough for Harry to notice, and for the students nearest him to notice too. A boy beside him leaned away slightly, eyes darting to Harry's scar, then to Harry's hands, as if expecting claws. Harry stared straight ahead. He didn't need claws, he had rules. And somewhere deep inside him, under the warmth and noise, something ancient shifted, like a giant turning in its sleep. Hogwarts was warm. That was the first lie the castle told him. The second lie was that warmth meant safety. Harry learned both within a week. Slytherin dormitories sat deep under the lake, wrapped in stone and green light. The windows looked out into dark water where shadows drifted like slow thoughts. It should have felt familiar, cold, enclosed, quiet. But it didn't. In the Ash world, cold was honest. It bit you and told you the price up front. Here, the cold was polite. It waited until you weren't paying attention. The other Slytherins watched him the way people watched a blade they didn't own. Not openly hostile, not yet. Just cautious. The whispers followed him anyway. That's him. The scar. He doesn't talk. Did you see the frost on his window? My dad says Potter's protected by old magic. My dad says Potter is a weapon. Harry ignored them. Ignoring was a skill. Survival required it. But something about Hogwarts was different from ruins and storms. At Hogwarts, people didn't attack with teeth, they attacked with stories. And Harry hated being turned into a story. Defense against the dark arts was on a Thursday. Harry walked into the classroom early, chose a seat where he could see the door and the windows, and waited. The room smelled of chalk dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic, like a storm trying to remember itself. Cabinets lined the walls, some locked, some covered in warning labels that made Harry's instincts tighten. Dark things behind doors, he understood that. Students filtered in, laughing and shoving. Harry stayed still. Stillness made people uncomfortable. That was useful. When the professor arrived, the room quieted, not from respect, but curiosity. He was a thin man with sharp eyes and a nervous energy that felt like a trapped animal. His smile was too quick, too practiced. "Welcome, welcome," he said brightly. "Defense against the dark arts is one of the most important subjects you will study at Hogwarts. You will learn how to protect yourselves from—" He hesitated, as if the word tasted bad. "From danger?" Harry didn't like him. He didn't trust people who smiled like that around danger. The lesson began with theory. Creatures, curses, counter-curses. Most of it sounded like a catalog: names, classifications, recommended responses. Harry listened, but part of him kept drifting. Because the way they talked about darkness here felt wrong, too neat, as if fear could be sorted into drawers. Craffen would have laughed. Evil is a story people tell when they don't want to learn the details. Harry leaned forward slightly when the professor drew a long, cloaked figure on the board. He didn't need the label. He recognized the shape in his bones. Dementors, the professor said, voice dropping with rehearsed drama. Guardians of Azkaban. Soul-sucking demons that feed on happy memories, leaving you with nothing but despair. The classroom shifted. Students leaned closer. A few shivered like they were performing fear for each other. Harry didn't perform anything. He just listened. And the moment the word Dementor landed in the air, his scar prickled, not like pain, but like a fingertip pressing from the inside. Harry's jaw tightened. The professor continued. In later years you may learn the Patronus charm, the only reliable defense against Dementors. It is advanced magic far beyond first years, but— Harry's hand rose before he decided to lift it. The professor blinked, surprised. Master Potter. Heads turned. Whispers sparked and spread. Harry didn't look at them. Dementors feed on happy memories, Harry said evenly. Yes, the professor said, relieved to have an easy question. They drain joy, hope, all the light within you. Harry stared at the drawing on the board. What if you don't have light like that? He asked. A few students snickered softly. The professor's smile twitched. Everyone has happy memories, Mr. Potter. Even you. Harry didn't argue. He didn't explain that in the Ash world, happy wasn't laughter. Happy was not dying. Happy was waking up and realizing the storm had passed you by. Happy was holding someone's hand and feeling it still warm. That kind of happiness wasn't bright. It was quiet. It didn't sparkle. It endured. The professor cleared his throat. Moving on, a Patronus is created by focusing on your happiest memory, channeling it through the incantation, expecto patronum, and producing a guardian formed of pure light. Pure light. Harry tasted the phrase like it was foreign. Light could burn. Light could blind. Light wasn't automatically good. But the room nodded, satisfied with the simplicity. Harry's fingers curled against his desk. He didn't like simple stories. That afternoon, Harry found himself in the library, not because he loved books, but because books were weapons if you knew how to use them. He searched quietly through shelves until he found a section on defensive charms and dark creatures. He pulled down heavy volumes with cracked spines and smelled old paper like dust and time. He read about Dementors, their origin uncertain, their nature parasitic, their presence cold. Harry paused. He didn't fear cold. He feared what cold meant when it was hungry. There were sketches, too. Old ink drawings of cloak shapes looming over prisoners. Notes in the margins about numb limbs, fog thoughts, the taste of regret. Harry turned a page and saw a paragraph that made his stomach drop. Dementors induce reliving of one's worst memories. Worst memories. Harry's mind flashed, uninvited, to ash and screaming wind. To the distant sound of something enormous moving through smoke. To hunger. To Hraf dragging him out of a snowdrift and forcing him to breathe slow. Harry's hand pressed flat against the page. His breath tried to speed up. He forced it down. Breathe slow. Panic kills. Harry closed the book and sat still until the tremor in his chest eased. Then he heard a voice behind him. You're not supposed to be in the restricted section, you know. Harry turned. It was the bushy-haired girl from the train, Granger. She held a stack of books like they were armor. Harry studied her the way he studied everything. She didn't look afraid. She looked annoyed. "I'm not in the restricted section," Harry said. She huffed. "You're near it, which is usually where trouble starts." Harry blinked once. That was fair. She leaned closer, eyes flicking to the book he'd been reading. "Dementors. You're a first year." Harry said nothing. Her gaze sharpened. "Why are you reading about Dementors?" Harry could have lied. Lying was easy, but Hraffin's rules weren't just about survival. They were about staying clean. Waste nothing. Words counted too. "I don't like being unprepared," Harry said. Granger's expression softened just a fraction, as if that answer made sense to her. "Well, you can't learn the Patronus charm yet anyway. It's advanced." Harry's eyes lowered to his hands. "I can still understand it," he said quietly. Granger hesitated, then sat across from him without asking. "Bold? Brave? Or foolish?" "Patronus magic is complicated," she said, suddenly more serious. "It's not just power, it's emotion. It's light." Harry finished flatly. Granger blinked. "Yes, light." Harry stared at the page where the sketch of a Dementor stared back. "I don't have light like they mean," he said. Granger opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second, she looked at him like she was seeing the difference between rumor and reality. Then she said softly, "You don't have to have perfect childhood memories to have a Patronus. That's not how it works." Harry looked up. Granger held his gaze, stubborn and certain. "You just need something worth protecting," she said. Harry didn't answer. Because that wasn't the problem. The problem was that every time he imagined protecting something, he imagined doing it like a wall, like ice, like the shape of winter. The first time Harry tried the Patronus charm, he did it alone. Not because he was reckless, because he didn't want an audience. He chose a practice room off an unused corridor, where the stone walls were thick and the air was cool. He stood in the center, wand in hand, his first real wand, holly and phoenix feather, strange and familiar like it had been waiting for him. He closed his eyes and searched for happiness. Not laughter, not birthdays, not hugs. He searched for endurance. He found it. A memory surfaced Hraffin's hand on his shoulder in the cave, heavy and real, while the storm screamed outside. The words carved like runes protect the small. Harry opened his eyes. He raised his wand. "Expecto Patronum," he said. Nothing happened. No spark, no glow, just silence. Harry's jaw tightened. He tried again. "Expecto Patronum." A chill ran through the room. The torches along the walls flickered, then steadied. But there was no Patronus, no animal, no light. Harry lowered his wand slowly. His chest felt tight, not from exhaustion, but from something worse. The sensation of pushing against a door that refused to open. Harry tried to breathe slow. He tried to choose a stronger memory. He tried to force it, the way he forced himself through snowstorms and hunger and pain. The air grew colder. His breath turned white. Frost crept over the edges of the stone floor in thin patterns, like lace forming under invisible fingers. Harry stopped. Because he understood, suddenly, with a clarity that made his stomach twist, he could force cold. He could force endurance. But this magic, this light, didn't care about force. It cared about truth, and the truth was, Harry's happiest memories weren't bright. They were survival. They were walls. They were winter holding the line. Harry lowered his wand, staring at the frost on the floor. "Fine," he whispered to the empty room. "If you won't be light," his scar prickled again. Not pain. A warning, like something inside him had heard his tone and leaned closer. Harry swallowed. He remembered Rule 1. Breathe slow. He forced his breath into calm, and as his calm returned, the frost receded. The torches steadied. The room warmed. Harry stood in silence, wand in hand, realizing something important. His magic answered him. Even when he failed. Even when he didn't know how. And if Dementors ever came near him, if something ever tried to drag him into despair, he didn't know what would happen. But he suspected it wouldn't look like a stag. Harry learned that Hogwarts had its own kind of storm. It didn't howl outside your shelter. It lived inside people, in whispers, in glances, in the way laughter cut off when you entered a room. Some nights, Harry lay in the Slytherin dormitory with the lake pressing coldly against the windows, and listened to boys breathing in their sleep. He could feel the castle around him. Ancient stone, old magic, moving staircases like shifting ribs. It should have felt safe. But Harry had been raised by endings, and endings taught you a truth most people hated: safety is never permanent. That was why, on the night the cold came, he was awake before it arrived. He sat up in his bed, eyes open in the dark, listening, not for footsteps, not for whispers, for the absence of sound. Because real danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stole the world's noise first, like a hand over a mouth. Harry's breath came out white. He frowned. The dormitory was cool. Yes, but this wasn't normal dungeon cool. This was the kind of cold that carried a hunger in it, the kind that didn't just chill your skin. It chilled your thoughts. Across the room, another boy stirred and muttered something in his sleep. Then he went still again, as if exhaustion had grabbed him by the throat. Harry swung his legs out of bed. His bare feet touched stone, and the stone felt like winter. He stood slowly, wand already in his hand, without remembering when he'd reached for it. Breathe slow. Harry breathed. The cold deepened. Down the corridor outside, a torch sputtered, and then like a distant drum beat, Harry felt a pressure in his chest. Not pain. Not fear exactly. Something worse. A weight made of despair. Harry's scar prickled. The hook and bone. Recognition. Harry didn't run. Running was what prey did. He opened the dormitory door and stepped into the corridor. The dungeon hallways were dim at night, lit by a line of greenish torches that normally burned steady. Tonight, their flames shrank blue at the edges, like even fire was losing its courage. Harry moved forward silent, and then he heard it. Not a scream, a small sound, a whimper. He followed it around a corner and found a first-year boy pressed against the wall near an alcove. Small, round-faced, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. He looked like he'd been crying for a long time. His wand was on the floor beside him, forgotten. Harry recognized him, a Slytherin called Miles Avery, a quiet kid who got pushed around by older students because he stuttered when he was nervous. Miles looked up when Harry approached, eyes wide. "P. Potter," he whispered. Harry crouched, keeping his voice calm. Calm was a shield. "What are you doing out here?" Harry asked. Miles swallowed. I couldn't sleep, and I thought I heard." His words broke off, because the corridor behind Harry went cold in a way that made the dungeon feel like a grave. Harry stood. His body reacted before his mind could argue. He placed himself between Miles and the darkness. "What did you hear?" Harry asked, even though he already knew. Miles's eyes filled again. "Nothing," he whispered. "That's what's wrong. Everything's quiet." Harry's breath fogged. The torches along the corridor dimmed further. Then the darkness moved. A shape drifted at the far end of the hallway, tall-cloaked, hooded. It didn't walk. It glided, as if the stone floor existed only as a suggestion. The air around it seemed to swallow light. Harry's stomach dropped. The drawing in the defense classroom. The book in the library. But no ink sketch had been honest enough. This wasn't a creature. This was a feeling given shape. The moment it entered the corridor, Harry's mind tried to betray him. Images crashed over him. Ash falling like snow, the sound of the world breaking, hunger twisting his stomach until it felt like it would eat his ribs. The cave. The storm. The idea that warmth was temporary. Harry's breath sped up. His hands trembled. The Dementor drifted closer. Miles made a sound that was almost a sob and almost a prayer. Harry remembered Raffin's hand on his shoulder, heavy, real. Breathe slow. Harry forced his lungs to obey slow in, slow out. The despair didn't vanish. It never vanished in one breath. But it stopped owning him. The Dementor's hood tilted, as if noticing the resistance. Then it glided closer, and the corridor dropped into a cold so deep it felt like the castle itself was holding its breath. Miles slid down the wall, his knees giving out. His face went slack with fear. Harry's grip tightened on his wand. He could run. He could drag Miles and run. But the corridor behind them was long, and the Dementor was faster than fear. And there was something else Harry knew, deep in his bones. If he ran, Miles would die. Harry stepped forward. The Dementor loomed now, a tall shadow wearing winter like a cloak. The torches nearest it sputtered into near darkness. Harry raised his wand. He tried to search for a bright, happy memory. There wasn't one. Not the way Hogwarts meant it. No warm kitchens. No gentle hands. But there was a memory that lived like a rune inside his chest. A vow. The cave, the storm, and a voice saying, "Protect the small." Harry didn't try to force light. He tried to be a wall. He tried to be the thing that stands between hunger and the helpless. His voice came out steady, expecto patronum. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Harry's chest tightened. The old frustration flared. The door that won't open. The Dementor drifted closer. Miles's eyes rolled back, breath shallow. Harry's scar burned sharp and cold at once. And then, the air behind Harry cracked like ice forming over a lake. A sound like deep winter settling into stone rolled down the hallway. The torches didn't go out. They bent. Their flames leaned away as if making room for something larger than fire. A pale glow gathered behind Harry. Blue, white, not warm gold. It rose taller and taller, filling the corridor with the shimmer of aurora light. Miles's eyes widened. The Dementor froze mid-glide. Harry turned his head just enough to see. A giant. Not flesh, not stone. A towering figure of frost-laced light, as tall as the dungeon ceiling allowed, shoulders broad as a gate, head bowed slightly to fit inside the corridor. Its body looked carved from ice under moonlight, edged with runic lines that glowed like cracks filled with starlight. Its eyes were not kind. But they were not cruel either. They were ancient. Glacier deep. The frost giant Patronus moved one step forward. The stone floor frosted instantly beneath its feet, not spreading like a curse, but forming clean, deliberate patterns, like the castle was being rewritten into winter for a moment. The Dementor recoiled. It didn't hiss. It didn't scream. It simply pulled back as if it had slammed into an invisible wall. Because it had. The frost giant raised one arm, not to strike, but to block. And suddenly the corridor felt different. The despair didn't disappear. But it hit the giant's presence and broke apart like waves against a cliff. The cold hunger in the Dementor's wake couldn't find purchase. It couldn't seep into skin. It couldn't reach Miles. Miles gasped sharply, like someone dragging their head above water after nearly drowning. The Dementor drifted backward. The frost giant took another step forward. Not chasing, advancing, holding the line. It didn't burn the Dementor away like the books described. It pushed it out. Slow, unstoppable, like winter driving wolves from a village. The Dementor retreated down the corridor, pressed back by an authority older than fear. Then, at the far bend, it vanished, slipping into shadows like a stain pulled out of cloth. Silence returned. Not the suffocating silence of despair. A clean, stunned quiet. The frost giant remained for one breath longer, towering behind Harry like a fortress that had decided to wear his shape. Harry's knees buckled. Heat dead hit him like a hammer. His fingertips went numb. His lungs burned with cold air. The giant's glow flickered, and then it dissolved into pale mist, leaving frost on stone and a lingering scent like snow on steel. Harry swayed, wand slipping in his grip. He heard footsteps, rapid, urgent, echoing down the corridor, voices, a shout. "Potter?" Professor McGonagall rounded the corner first, tartan robes snapping, wand raised. Her eyes took in the frost, the shivering boy on the floor, and Harry standing unsteadily in the middle like he'd been struck by a storm. More footsteps behind her. A tall figure in midnight robust Dumbledore, moving with sudden, frightening speed. McGonagall's gaze snapped to Harry's face. "What did you do?" she demanded. Harry tried to answer. His teeth chattered so hard his words broke. Miles croaked from the floor, voice small but desperate. "H, he saved me." McGonagall's eyes widened, just a fraction, before her sternness returned like armor. Dumbledore's gaze swept over the frost patterns on the stone. His eyes lingered on the runic shapes the ice had left behind, as if he was reading a language he hadn't expected Hogwarts to speak tonight. Then his eyes landed on Harry. Not on his scar. On him. Harry hated how much that mattered. Dumbledore's voice was gentle, but there was steel under it. "There was a Dementor in this castle," he said quietly. Harry's numb fingers clenched.
"Yes,"
Harry managed. McGonagall's jaw tightened. "That is impossible." Harry looked at the frost on the floor. He looked at Miles still shaking. He looked at the dim torches that seemed afraid to brighten again. "Then," Harry said, voice raw, "it shouldn't have been here." For a moment, no one spoke, and in that silence, Harry realized something that made his stomach twist even harder than the cold. He had done something no first year was supposed to do. He had cast a Patronus, and it wasn't a stag. It was a giant, a monstrous protector made of ice and light, a thing the wizarding world would not know how to name without fear. Dumbledore stepped closer, eyes thoughtful. "Mr. Potter," he said softly, "I believe we need to talk." Harry's vision blurred at the edges. He tried to stay standing, because he was still following the rules. Breathe slow, waste nothing. Protect the small. But the cold had taken its payment. And before he could speak again, his legs finally gave out, stone rushing up to meet him. While behind his eyelids, he saw glacier eyes watching from the dark, as if something ancient had answered his vow and was now waiting to see what the world would do with it. Harry woke to warmth he didn't trust. It pressed against his skin like a lie. Thick blankets, crackling fire, the soft glow of lanterns. The air smelled of herbs and clean linen, not ash and iron. His body felt heavy, sluggish like his blood had turned to river slush. He tried to sit up. Pain lanced behind his eyes. A hand, firm, practiced, pushed him gently back down. "Absolutely not," said Poppy Pomfrey, voice brisk as snap twigs. "You are staying put. You're freezing from the inside out, and if you try to be heroic in my infirmary, I will personally transfigure your spine into a coat rack." Harry blinked at the white ceiling. His breath came out normal, no fog. That should have reassured him. Instead, it made him uneasy. He lifted his hands slowly from under the blankets and stared at his fingertips. The numbness was fading, replaced by a dull ache as warmth returned like blood remembering how to move. "What happened to the frost?" he asked, voice hoarse. Pomfrey thrust a cup at his mouth. "Drink." Harry drank automatically. The potion tasted like pepper and bitter roots. Heat spread through his chest, then down his arms, then into his legs like a wave that refused to be stopped. Pomfrey watched his throat work and nodded once, satisfied. "You collapsed," she said, "from exhaustion and hypothermia. Don't you dare tell me you were fine. No one is fine after forcing advanced magic through a body that isn't ready." Harry's jaw tightened. He hadn't forced it. He'd promised. But he didn't say that, not yet. He turned his head slightly. Near the foot of his bed stood Minerva McGonagall, arms folded, eyes sharp enough to cut stone. Beside her, tall, calm, watching as if watching was a form of magic, stood Albus Dumbledore. Harry's shoulders tensed under the blankets. McGonagall spoke first. "Mr. Potter," she said, and her tone held equal parts fury and fear. "Do you have any idea what you did?" Harry held her gaze. "I stopped it." McGonagall's nostrils flared. "You attempted a charm that 7th years struggle with and produced a creature in the corridor." "A Patronus," Harry corrected quietly. Dumbledore's eyes flickered, amused for the briefest heartbeat, then serious again. McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line. "A Patronus does not take that form." Harry didn't look away. Mine did. Silence settled between them. Not empty. Testing. Dumbledore stepped closer to the bed, hands folded behind his back like he'd brought patience as a weapon. "Harry," he said gently, "I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it with the same honesty you used in that corridor." Harry's fingers curled slightly into the blanket. Dumbledore's voice stayed soft. "Who taught you the Patronus charm?" Harry didn't hesitate. "No one." McGonagall's eyebrows shot up. "That is not possible." Harry's stare sharpened. "It happened?" Pomfrey made a disapproving noise. "And it nearly killed you." Harry's throat tightened at that. Not fear. Something else. Because he remembered the giant. He remembered how the despair hit it and broke. He remembered Miles gasping like a drowning boy pulled to air. He remembered the way the giant had stood. And the price. The cold had taken its payment without mercy. Dumbledore watched him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if confirming a theory he didn't like. "The Patronus is not merely a spell," Dumbledore said. "It is a declaration, a crystallized truth." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Then what's wrong with mine?" McGonagall opened her mouth, but Dumbledore lifted one hand slightly, enough to pause her. "There is nothing inherently wrong with it," Dumbledore said. "But it is extraordinary. and extraordinary things draw attention. Harry felt his spine stiffen. Attention was a predator. As of this morning, Dumbledore continued, the castle has received an owl from the Ministry. McGonagall's voice turned colder. They wish to interview you. Pomfrey snorted. Of course they do. Harry stared at the blankets, then up again. Because of the Dementor. Because there was a Dementor inside Hogwarts, McGonagall said sharply, and because you produced magic that should not be possible at your age. Harry's scar tingled faintly, like it didn't enjoy being discussed. Dumbledore's gaze slid over it, then away, deliberately choosing Harry's eyes instead. They are frightened, he said, and frightened people reach for rules. Harry's voice came out flat. Rules to shape me. McGonagall's lips tightened as if she disliked how accurate that was. Dumbledore's tone stayed calm. Rules to contain what they do not understand. Harry's chest rose and fell once slow. Breathe slow. Panic kills. How long until they come? He asked. McGonagall glanced toward the windows. They're already here. They didn't march into the hospital wing like invaders. They arrived like paperwork given legs. 2 witches and 1 wizard in dark ministry robes stepped through the doors with quiet authority, followed by a pair of Hogwarts staff Harry didn't recognize. Their wands were visible, not raised, but not hidden. The witch in front had iron, gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She moved like someone used to walking into rooms where people lied. Amelia Bones. Harry didn't know her name, but he knew her type. A judge with teeth. Behind her stood a tall auror with a calm face and a gaze like a locked door. Kingsley Shacklebolt carried himself like he'd seen real monsters and didn't need to pretend otherwise. The third was a thin wizard with ink stains on his fingers and a leather case clutched like a shield. He smiled too quickly. Harry didn't like him. Bones stopped at the foot of Harry's bed and looked down at him like she was weighing his bones. Harry Potter, she said. Harry said nothing. Bones didn't seem offended. I am here because Hogwarts reported a Dementor breach, she continued, and because witnesses reported an underage student cast a corporeal Patronus, unusual enough. Her eyes sharpened. In the form of a frost giant. McGonagall's posture went rigid. Pomfrey crossed her arms like she'd love nothing more than to throw the Ministry out by their collars. Dumbledore remained still, polite as a blade in velvet. Harry stared at Bones. Is that illegal? He asked. The ink-stained wizard made a tiny choking sound as if the question surprised him. Bones, however, answered evenly. The Patronus charm is not illegal. Underage magic outside school grounds is regulated. Inside Hogwarts, the situation is complicated. Harry heard the real meaning beneath the words. We'll decide what this means when it becomes useful to decide. Bones continued, but a Dementor inside Hogwarts is a direct violation of Ministry protocol. Which means someone failed. Someone made a mistake. Her gaze slid briefly toward Dumbledore, acknowledging that the mistake might not be his. Then her eyes returned to Harry. And the form your Patronus took suggests magic most witches and wizards do not encounter in their lives. Harry's fingers twitched under the blankets. The memory of Glacier Eyes watched him from behind his ribs. Kingsley spoke for the first time, voice deep and steady. Mr. Potter, we're not here to arrest you. Harry's gaze snapped to him. Kingsley held it. No flinch, no fear. Just a calm truth. We're here to understand what happened, Kingsley said. And how a Dementor got past Hogwarts wards. Harry looked at Bones again. I didn't bring it in. Bones nodded once. I believe you. The ink-stained wizard cleared his throat eagerly. If I may, Madam Bones, standard procedure suggests we shield. Pomfrey cut in like a sword. Standard procedure suggests you can standard procedure yourselves out of my infirmary. The boy is recovering. Bones didn't even glance at him as she spoke. We will not touch him without consent. Harry's eyes narrowed. Consent? A civilized word. A dangerous one too, because it could be twisted into obligation. Dumbledore's voice came smoothly. Harry will speak with you when he is well enough. Bones studied Dumbledore, then nodded. Agreed. We will conduct the interview in your office, headmaster. Not here. The ink-stained wizard looked disappointed. Harry noticed. He remembered Hraffin's warning, People who want to study you forget you're human. Bones's gaze returned to Harry. One question now, Mr. Potter. And you may answer it or refuse. Harry said nothing, waiting. Bones spoke carefully, like choosing each word mattered. When you cast your Patronus, what were you thinking? Harry's throat tightened. Because the honest answer wasn't pretty. He didn't think of laughter. He didn't think of sunshine. He didn't think of parties or sweets or happy families. He thought of a boy shaking in a corridor. He thought of the idea of someone smaller than him dying because he chose safety over action. He thought of Raffin's hand on his shoulder in the cave. He thought of the storm outside and the vow inside. Harry looked Bones in the eye. I was thinking, he said slowly, that it wasn't going to take him. Bones's gaze sharpened. Him. Harry's voice stayed steady. The Dementor. It wasn't going to take Miles. McGonagall's breath caught softly. Kingsley's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes warmed. Just a fraction. The ink-stained wizard scribbled furiously in a notebook. Harry's gaze flicked to him. The wizard hesitated, then smiled again. Harry felt the air cool a hair's breadth. Pomfrey hissed, "Do not." Dumbledore moved, smooth and sudden. He placed one hand lightly on Harry's blanket, barely touching but grounding. Harry's breath slowed. The temperature steadied. Bones noticed everything. Her eyes flicked to the frost that tried to form and then didn't. She looked back at Harry, and for the first time her voice held something like respect. A defensive intent. She murmured. Protective. Harry didn't answer, because protective wasn't always seen as good. Sometimes it was seen as threatening, especially when it came wrapped in the shape of a giant. Bones stepped back. We will speak in the headmaster's office within the hour. She turned to leave, then paused and looked over her shoulder. One more thing, she said. The corridor where this happened. There were patterns in the frost. Lines, shapes, like... Her eyes narrowed. Runes. Harry's scar tingled again, sharper now. Dumbledore's gaze became very still. McGonagall's voice turned low. That is impossible. Bones didn't argue. She simply said, someone will inspect the site. If those markings are what I believe they are, this incident is larger than a frightened creature wandering where it shouldn't. Harry's stomach tightened, because he remembered the way the frost had formed under the frost giant's feet. Not random, deliberate, like a language. Bones left. Kingsley lingered one heartbeat longer and met Harry's eyes. His voice was quiet, meant only for Harry. Whatever that Patronus is, he said, make sure it stays yours. Then he was gone too. When they were alone again, the hospital wing felt colder. Or maybe Harry was just more aware of how fragile warmth could be. Dumbledore leaned closer, voice gentle. They will ask you things, he said. They will try to name you, categorize you. If they cannot, some will try to fear you. Harry stared at the ceiling. Let them, he said. McGonagall's voice cracked like a whip. Do not be foolish. Harry turned his head and looked at her. I don't want to be a story, he said quietly. I don't want to be a weapon. I don't want to be, he swallowed. Owned. McGonagall's expression softened for the briefest moment, like she understood more than she wanted to admit. Dumbledore's eyes held a sadness Harry didn't know what to do with. You may not want it, Dumbledore said, but your existence has always attracted people who collect things. Harry's scar pulsed faintly. Dumbledore continued, you do have one advantage. Harry's gaze sharpened. What? Dumbledore smiled, small and real. You have already survived an ending. Harry's throat tightened. Dumbledore straightened. Rest. Then we will meet them together? Harry closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Behind his eyelids, he saw a corridor of stone and cold. He saw a giant of frost, light standing like a fortress. And he felt it, deep, ancient, watchful, like the thing he had summoned wasn't just a spell. It was an echo, a contract, a shield that had accepted his vow and was now waiting for him to prove he deserved it. The corridor didn't look like a battlefield in the morning. That was the cruel part. By breakfast, the frost had melted. The torches burned steady again. Students drifted past the alcove where Miles had nearly drowned in despair, laughing and talking like the castle hadn't held its breath the night before. But Harry could still feel it. Not in the stone. In himself. A cold memory under the skin. And something else. Something heavier than memory, like a presence that had noticed him and decided to keep watching. He walked to the corridor anyway, early enough that most people were still in the great hall. His steps were silent, not out of stealth but habit. He stopped where the frost giant had stood. The floor looked normal now, no ice, no runes, no proof. Except, if you knew how to look, there were faint hairline marks in the stone, like scratches left by something that had pressed reality a little too hard. Harry crouched and traced one with his fingertip. It wasn't random. The line curved, then hooked, like a thorn. He had carved symbols like that into stone in another life. Not the same alphabet, but the same truth intent leaves shape. A shadow fell across him. Harry didn't startle. He looked up. Professor Severus Snape stood there like a bad mood given bones, black robes swallowing the light around him. His eyes flicked to Harry's hand on the stone, then to Harry's face. "Well," Snape said softly, "the rumor is true." Harry rose slowly. "Which rumor?" Snape's lip curled. "That you haunt corridors at dawn like a ghost with a conscience." Harry didn't react. Insults were just weather. Snape stepped closer, gaze sharp. "You created a corporeal Patronus." Harry held his stare. "Yes." Snape's eyes narrowed, as if he disliked how simple the answer was, and its form was unconventional. Harry's fingers flexed once at his side. He could feel the memory of the giant like a weight on his back. Snape continued, voice silk over steel. "Do you know what most children your age do when confronted by despair?" Harry didn't answer. "They cry," Snape said. "They run. They freeze." His gaze dropped briefly to Harry's wand. "And you?" Snape murmured, "Summoned winter." Harry's scar tingled faintly, like it didn't enjoy Snape naming it. Snape's voice lowered further. "Tell me, Potter, was it your choice?" Harry's jaw tightened. This wasn't curiosity. This was a trap disguised as a question. He answered carefully. "It answered me." Snape's eyes glinted. "That is not what I asked." Harry stared back. "That's the truth." For a moment, Snape didn't move. Then he leaned in, close enough that Harry could smell potion ingredients on his robes. Bitter herbs, metal, smoke, truth. Snape said quietly, "Is often just the prettiest mask a secret wears." Harry didn't blink. Snape straightened. "The headmaster wishes to see you. Now." Harry followed without protest, but every step up from the dungeons felt like climbing out of cold water into a warmer world that still didn't fit. The headmaster's office smelled like lemon and old wood. Fawkes the Phoenix watched from his perch like a living flame. Warm, steady, awake. Harry's eyes lingered on the bird longer than he meant to. Something about it unsettled him. Fire that didn't devour. Dumbledore stood near his desk, hands folded behind his back. His expression was gentle, but his eyes were sharp in the way of people who carried too many truths. "You came," Albus Dumbledore said. Harry nodded once. Snape remained by the door like a locked gate. Dumbledore gestured to a chair. Harry didn't sit. He stayed standing, because standing felt like control. Dumbledore didn't push him. Instead, he placed something on the desk between them, a sheet of parchment with a charcoal rubbing of faint lines. Harry's chest tightened. "Those are the markings from the corridor," Dumbledore said. Harry stared at the rubbing. The lines curved and hooked in ways that made his fingers itch with recognition, not because it was identical to what Raffen had taught him. Raffen's runes were older, rougher, but because it felt like the same principle. Carved intent. Dumbledore's voice stayed calm. "Madame Bones has requested a full investigation." Harry's gaze snapped up. "They're going to treat me like a threat." Snape made a small, amused noise. Dumbledore didn't deny it. "Some will. Others will treat you like an opportunity." Harry's stomach turned. Dumbledore continued, "Which is why you must understand what you did before someone else decides what it means for you." Harry's voice came out low. "It's a Patronus." Snape's tone sliced in. "It is not just a Patronus." Dumbledore lifted a hand, quieting Snape without looking. "Harry," Dumbledore said gently, "when you cast that charm, your magic did not merely create a guardian. It wrote itself into the environment. That is rare." Harry's throat tightened. So what am I supposed to do? Dumbledore's eyes softened. Learn control. Harry flinched internally at the word. Control was what cages were made of. Dumbledore seemed to sense it. Not control that diminishes you, he clarified. Control that keeps you alive. Harry said nothing. Dumbledore slid another parchment forward, this one covered in notes and diagrams. There were sketches of a human figure surrounded by a faint aura, and beside it, variations of barriers, thin, layered, curved. This is defensive theory, Dumbledore said. Protection is your instinct. We will shape it into skill. Harry's eyes narrowed. Well, Dumbledore's smile was small. You will receive instruction quietly, privately, until we know what we are dealing with. Snape's voice was dry, and until the Ministry stops circling like vultures. Harry's fingers curled. Dumbledore leaned forward. But there is one condition, Harry. Harry met his gaze. What? Dumbledore's voice turned serious. You must promise me you will not attempt to summon that Patronus again without supervision. Harry's chest tightened. The frost giant hadn't felt like a spell you used. It had felt like something that arrived when called by a vow. Harry hesitated. Snape's eyes sharpened as if waiting for disobedience. Harry heard Hraffin's voice in his head. Every stubborn decision has a cost. Learn to pay for that choice. Harry exhaled slowly. I'll try, Harry said. Snape scoffed. Try. Dumbledore held Harry's gaze. That is all I ask. For now. The first lesson happened that night, in a practice room warded so heavily the air tasted faintly of iron. Dumbledore didn't treat the room like a classroom. He treated it like a storm cellar. Your Patronus manifested as a frost giant? Dumbledore said, wand in hand. That suggests your protective magic takes the form of a fortress. Unyielding, cold, absolute. Harry stood with his wand lowered, shoulders tense. It kept the Dementor away.
Yes,
Dumbledore agreed. But you collapsed because you paid too much too fast. Harry's jaw tightened. It was worth it. Dumbledore's gaze sharpened. It will not always be one boy in a corridor. There will be days when you must protect many and still stand afterward. Harry's throat tightened. Dumbledore raised his wand. So tonight, we do not summon the giant. A strange relief and disappointment hit Harry at once. Instead, Dumbledore drew a circle in the air with his wand, and a faint shimmer appeared, like a bubble of pressure. This is a ward, Dumbledore said. A principle, not a spell. It is protection given form. You understand that? Harry nodded slightly. Good, Dumbledore said. Then we will build from your instinct. Not toward brightness. Toward stability. He paced slowly, eyes thoughtful. Your magic responds strongly to intent and environment. That is why the frost formed patterns. That is why the corridor changed under your Patronus. Harry's fingers twitched, remembering the clean lines of ice. Dumbledore lifted a hand. Show me a small defense, something you can maintain. Harry swallowed. He lifted his wand. He didn't look for joy, he looked for the vow. He pictured Miles, small, shaking, helpless, behind him. He pictured himself standing in front. Not as a hero, as a wall. Harry spoke quietly, carefully, expecta. Dumbledore's voice cut in. No incantation. Harry froze. Dumbledore's gaze was steady. Do it like you breathe. Harry's chest rose slowly. His lungs steadied. His wand hand trembled once. Then Harry focused on shape. A thin layer between harm and the small. A pressure formed in the air. The torches dimmed slightly at the edges, and a faint blue, white sheen appeared in front of Harry, no bigger than a shield, thin as ice on a pond. Harry's breath fogged. He held it. His fingers began to numb. The sheen held. Dumbledore's eyes widened just a fraction. A barrier, he murmured. You've created Harry's jaw clenched. His vision swam slightly. Dumbledore stepped forward at once and tapped Harry's wand hand lightly. The barrier vanished. Warmth rushed back into the room. Harry swayed. Dumbledore's voice was calm but firm. That is enough. Harry blinked hard. I could have held it longer. You could. Dumbledore agreed. And then you would have fallen. Again. Harry's teeth clenched. Dumbledore studied him. Do you feel it? Harry hesitated, then nodded. It takes heat? Yes. Dumbledore said softly. A price. You must learn to pay it in measured coins, not in your whole fortune. Harry stared at his own hand. The fingertips were pale. Dumbledore lifted his wand and warmed the air around Harry gently. Subtle, controlled. "We will name this technique," he said. "Names give structure." Harry's eyes flicked up. What name? Dumbledore looked thoughtful. Rhyme ward. Harry repeated it silently. Rhyme ward. A wall of winter. A shield. Not a monster. Dumbledore walked to the far end of the room. "Next," he said, "we'll refine how your magic interacts with the world." He flicked his wand, and a small bell appeared on a table, polished and bright. "Make the room quiet," Dumbledore instructed, not by silencing the bell, by muffling the space around it. Harry stared at the bell. That kind of precision made his stomach tighten. In the Ash world, you didn't do precision. You did survival, but Dumbledore was right. Survival here demanded a different shape. Harry closed his eyes and breathed slow. He imagined snow falling, thick, soft, swallowing sound until the world became a hush. He lifted his wand and pushed that hush outward. The air thickened. The torches dimmed slightly. Dumbledore rang the bell. The sound came out dull, as if it had to fight to exist. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "Excellent." Harry opened his eyes, breath fogging. "It's quiet." Dumbledore nodded. White silence. Harry's knees trembled slightly. He forced them steady. The numbness returned faster this time. The heat debt was real. Dumbledore lifted his wand. "Release it." Harry released. Warmth seeped back into the room. Harry exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to sink to the floor. Dumbledore watched him closely. "How do you feel?" Harry's voice came out honest despite himself. "Cold." Dumbledore's eyes softened. "Good. That means you can still feel the cost. That means you are not numb to it." Harry didn't know what that meant, but it sounded important. Dumbledore moved again, and this time he created a harmless practice dummy, a simple conjured shape with a wand arm. "Last," Dumbledore said, "we test restraint." Harry's gaze sharpened. "Control?" Dumbledore corrected. "Your instinct will be to overwhelm. You must learn to hold back." The dummy lifted its wand. A mild stinging hex zipped toward Harry. Harry didn't dodge. He raised his wand and imagined cold pressure tightening around the dummy's wrist. Not breaking, not harming, just stopping. The air snapped cold. The dummy's wand arm slowed. The hex veered off. Harry's breath fogged heavily now. His hand felt like ice. Dumbledore nodded. "Frost grip?" Harry released it immediately, chest heaving once, then forcing itself calm, breathed slow. Panic kills. He stood very still, feeling the tremble in his bones. Dumbledore stepped closer, voice gentle. "You have just learned 3 techniques without summoning the giant." Harry swallowed, but the giant is stronger. Dumbledore's gaze grew very serious. "The giant is scale. Scale without discipline becomes tragedy." Harry's scar pulsed faintly, as if agreeing. Dumbledore lowered his voice. "Harry, when you cast that Patronus, something answered you. That is rare, and it is dangerous, not because it is evil, but because it is powerful and old." Harry's chest tightened. "So what am I?" Dumbledore looked at him like he was choosing his next words very carefully. "You are a boy," he said softly, "with an instinct to protect that is stronger than your instinct to belong." Harry's throat burned. Dumbledore continued, "The wizarding world will test you. It will demand you prove you are light in the shape it recognizes." Harry's eyes narrowed. "And if I'm not?" Dumbledore's voice was steady. "Then you will have to show them that light can be cold." Harry stood in the warded room, breath finally clear again, and realized something that made his stomach twist with equal parts fear and determination. He wasn't learning to become a duelist. He was learning to become a fortress. And fortresses didn't get to be misunderstood quietly. They got sieged. Hogwarts didn't ask when it wanted something. It arranged a room. It summoned witnesses. It called it, "For your own good." And then it watched to see if you broke. Harry found out about the demonstration at breakfast. Because whispers traveled faster than owls. They're making him do it in front of everyone. "My brother says the ministry thinks it's dark magic. I heard it wasn't even a Patronus. Just a monster made of ice." Harry ate quietly, ignoring the way conversations dipped when he lifted his head. He didn't like being stared at while he chewed. It reminded him of starving winters, when the smallest scrap of food could start a fight. Across the table, Draco Malfoy leaned toward his friends, smirk sharpened like a polished blade. "They'll see," Malfoy said loudly enough for half the table to hear. "Some people are born wrong." Harry didn't respond. Not because he wasn't angry, because he could feel what anger did to the air. He didn't want Frost in the Great Hall. Not today. A small movement to his right. Miles sitting stiffly, hands clenched around his goblet like it might float away. His eyes darted to Harry, then down again, as if looking at Harry directly was forbidden. Harry spoke without turning his head. "Eat." Miles blinked. "What?" Harry's voice stayed flat. "If you don't, you'll shake more." Miles swallowed and took a bite. Harry's jaw tightened. Protect the small. It didn't matter if the small didn't know how to stand yet. The Great Hall was different when it was prepared for judgment. The house tables had been pushed back. A wide open space sat in the center like an arena. The teacher's table remained, but there were extra chairs. Official-looking ones, set to the side. Ministry chairs. In the high windows, daylight spilled in, bright and ordinary, as if the castle wasn't about to try to define a boy with a label. Harry stood at the edge of the open space with his wand in hand, feeling the familiar chill under his skin. Not frost, not yet, but the quiet awareness of cost. On the teacher's platform, Albus Dumbledore sat with his hands folded, eyes calm but alert. Beside him, Minerva McGonagall looked like she was prepared to bite anyone who sneezed the wrong way. Severus Snape was stillness in black cloth, expression unreadable. To the side, ministry officials sat in a row, among them Amelia Bones, posture straight, gaze sharp, and Kingsley Shacklebolt, calm as an iron door. Students filled the perimeter like a living wall. Harry could feel their attention the way he could feel a storm building. Pressure, heat, anticipation. Some looked excited. Some looked scared. Some looked eager for him to fail, because failure would make their world simpler. Harry's stomach tightened at the simplicity of that. Dumbledore rose. "Today," he said, voice carrying without strain, "we will address rumors and fear with clarity." A ripple of whispers. Dumbledore continued, "A Patronus is a protective charm. It is not a sign of darkness, nor a guarantee of goodness. It is a reflection of intent." Harry's fingers flexed once around his wand. Bones stood next, her voice crisp. "This is not a trial in the legal sense," she said, and the fact she had to clarify that made the room tense. "It is an assessment. Hogwarts must remain safe, so must its students." Her gaze flicked to Harry, measuring. "Mr. Potter will demonstrate the Patronus charm under supervision." Harry heard a student whisper, "He's a first year. How is this even happening?" He didn't answer the question. He was tired of questions that treated him like an error in a system. Dumbledore's eyes met his, steady, warning. "Measured coins, not your whole fortune." Harry nodded slightly. McGonagall stepped forward. "Mr. Potter," she said, "begin with the incantation and a simple memory." Simple. Harry hated that word. Simple was something people said when they had never had to keep themselves alive. He raised his wand anyway. The Great Hall held its breath. Harry tried to do what they expected. He tried to reach for something bright, something warm, something that looked good from the outside. He reached, and found nothing shaped like that. There was no birthday cake, no comforting arms, no laughter that didn't have teeth behind it. He found only endurance. He found only the vow. He spoke clearly. "Expecto Patronum," for a heartbeat, nothing. The crowd shifted, sensing failure. Then the air cooled a fraction. A hush slid over the room like snow falling soft and relentless. Candles flickered, and a pale blue, white glow gathered behind Harry's shoulders. A ripple of fear moved through the students, immediate and instinctive, like prey realizing the predator is awake. Harry's chest tightened.
No, not scale.
Not here. Not in front of everyone. He forced his breath slow. He focused hard on the lessons, on shape, on restraint. The glow behind him didn't rise into a towering figure. Instead, it condensed. A single, broad silhouette, half-formed like the outline of a giant standing behind a wall of glass. One shoulder, one arm, a presence too big for the room, held back by Harry's control. Frost laced the stone beneath his feet in thin, careful lines, not spreading, not exploding, just present. A controlled winter. Harry held it for 2 breaths. 3. Then he released it. The glow faded. The temperature steadied. The candles brightened again. A murmur rolled across the hall. Confusion mixed with relief. Bones narrowed her eyes. That was not a full manifestation. Harry lowered his wand slightly. I didn't want a full one. Snape's lip curled, almost amused. How noble. Harry didn't look at him. McGonagall's voice was sharp. Can you produce a standard Patronus, Mr. Potter? An animal form? Harry's throat tightened. He could lie. He could try again and collapse. He could force it and risk the giant coming all the way out in front of children who would scream and never forget. He chose honesty. No, Harry said. The word hit the hall like a stone dropped in water. Whispers erupted. He can't. Then it's not real. Then what was that thing? Bones stood straighter. Why not? Harry's jaw tightened. Because the truth was dangerous in a room full of people who thought light had only one shape. He lifted his chin anyway. Because you keep saying happy like it means the same thing for everyone, Harry said, voice steady, carrying. And it doesn't. The hall quieted. Even the students who disliked him listened now, because the story was shifting into something real. Harry continued, My happiest memory isn't warm. It isn't sweet. It's not easy. He felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something older. I remember a night, Harry said, when the world was loud with dying, and someone put a hand on my shoulder and told me to breathe. Told me to endure. Told me to protect the small. He paused. Then he said the part that mattered most, the part that tasted like iron. My happiness is when someone who should have died doesn't. A silence fell so deep Harry could hear the lake, water shifting against the castle walls. In that silence, a voice from the student crowd spoke, small, shaking, but clear. He saved me, Miles said. Heads turned. Miles stepped forward a half step, trembling, face pale. He swallowed hard and forced the words out, like pulling a thorn from his throat. There was a Dementor, Miles said. I couldn't breathe. And then his Patronus, his giant, stood between me and it. A ripple of discomfort ran through the hall, because now it wasn't rumor, it was witness. Bones looked at Miles carefully, then back at Harry. Kingsley's gaze stayed on Harry, calm but intent. Dumbledore's voice came gently, but it carried steel. A Patronus is protection, he reminded the room, not decoration. Bones nodded once. Very well, Mr. Potter, demonstrate control again. Smaller, defensive. Harry's pulse steadied. This, at least, was honest. Defensive made sense. He raised his wand and didn't reach for brightness. He reached for shape. He imagined a thin barrier between Miles and despair. He imagined winter as a wall that refuses to move. He whispered nothing. He breathed. And the rhyme word formed. A faint blue-white plane shimmered in the air, no bigger than a door, thin as ice on a pond. It didn't look dramatic. It looked reliable. Harry held it. His fingertips began to numb. Heat debt quietly collecting its price. He kept breathing slow. McGonagall's eyes narrowed, impressed despite herself. Flitwick, small, bright-eyed, leaned forward in his seat with a gasp of academic fascination, then clapped a hand over his mouth like he remembered people were watching, and this wasn't a lecture. Phileas Flitwick Bones studied the barrier like she was memorizing it. Then she lifted her wand and cast a mild pressure charm at the ward. Testing, not attacking. The rhyme ward flexed. Held. Harry's knees trembled once. He didn't let them buckle. Dumbledore's voice came softly enough. Harry released. The ward vanished. Warmth rushed back into his fingers like a delayed mercy. He exhaled slowly, jaw clenched, refusing to show how close he'd come to swaying. Bones nodded, satisfied. You can control it. Snape's voice slid in like smoke. Control does not equal safety. Harry looked at Snape now, and for a moment, the air cooled. Not frost. Not threat, just the smallest warning that Harry was listening. Harry spoke evenly. My Patronus doesn't hurt people. Snape's eyes glinted, yet. McGonagall's voice snapped. Severus. Dumbledore lifted a hand, and the tension eased, barely. Bones stood again facing the hall. Mystery. Potter's Patronus is unconventional, she said. It is also demonstrably defensive. The Ministry will continue to investigate the Dementor breach. Hogwarts will provide additional supervision. Her gaze cut back to Harry. And Mr. Potter will not be treated as a criminal for protecting another student. That should have felt like victory. It didn't. Because Harry could see it in the crowd, some students looked relieved, some looked thoughtful, and some looked angry that the world hadn't handed them an easy monster. Malfoy's mouth twisted, eyes cold. Across the crowd, Hermione Granger watched Harry with a fierce, stubborn kind of respect, as if she'd just watched a rule bend without breaking. Harry lowered his wand, his scar tingled faintly, like something inside him had been listening to every word. Dumbledore's gaze met his again, quiet, approving and cautious. Harry understood the message without it being spoken. You passed today. But today was only the beginning. Because now everyone had seen it. Not fully. Not at its true scale, but enough. They had seen that Harry Potter's light didn't prance. It stood. Cold and unbreakable, and the wizarding world, so used to gentle stories, didn't know whether to fear that, or to try to use it. After the trial of light, Hogwarts didn't go back to normal, it just learned to pretend better. People smiled at Harry in corridors now, thin smiles, careful ones. Professors watched him like he was a book that might bite. Students stopped whispering when he walked past, which was worse than whispering, because it meant they were thinking the same things, only quieter. The castle itself felt different too. Not hostile, aware. Like ancient stone had noticed a new kind of protection moving through its veins, and it hadn't decided yet whether to welcome it or warn others. Harry didn't like being noticed. But he couldn't unring the bell now. That night, a note appeared on his pillow as if it had always been there. Come to my office after curfew. Alone. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it under his mattress like it was a blade. He waited until the dormitory went quiet, until the lake shadow outside the windows drifted lazily like a slow heartbeat, then slipped out. No cloak, no drama, just silent footsteps and slow breath. Breathe slow. Panic kills. The staircases shifted as he climbed, but they didn't trap him. The portraits murmured as he passed, but they didn't shout. It was as if the castle wanted to see where he was going, or as if it already knew. When he reached the headmaster's door, the gargoyle didn't ask for a password. It simply moved. Harry paused. That wasn't normal. He stepped inside. The office was warm with lamplight and smelled faintly of lemon and old paper. It should have felt comforting. It didn't. Warm rooms still felt like traps to him. Rooms that assumed you could relax. Dumbledore stood by the window, hands behind his back, watching the moonlit grounds. He didn't turn right away. Do you know what frightened them today? Dumbledore asked quietly. Harry stayed standing. The giant. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Yes, but not because it is monstrous. Harry's fingers flexed once at his side. He didn't like riddles. Dumbledore continued, voice calm. It frightened them because it didn't behave like their idea of light. It did not leap. It did not dance. It did not charm. Harry's jaw tightened. It protected. Precisely? Dumbledore said. He turned then, eyes sharp and kind at once. Protection that does not ask permission makes power collectors nervous. Harry's scar tingled faintly, like it didn't enjoy the phrase power collectors. Dumbledore stepped toward his desk, then stopped as if choosing where to place the next truth. You are going to feel an urge, Dumbledore said. Harry didn't answer, but his posture tightened. The urge to test it. Dumbledore went on. To prove you can summon it whenever you wish. To show the world that no one can corner you. Harry's throat tightened because it wasn't an urge. It was a hunger. A survival instinct disguised as pride. He didn't like that Dumbledore could see it. Dumbledore's voice softened. That urge is natural, and it is the most dangerous thing you could obey. Harry stared at him. Why? Dumbledore gestured to the center of the room. Show me. Harry's fingers curled around his wand. He didn't want an audience. But Dumbledore wasn't here to gawk. Dumbledore was here to measure. Harry raised the wand. He reached for the vow, protect the small. But there was no Miles here. No trembling boy in a corridor. No immediate threat. Only Harry and the memory of the giant's weight behind him. He inhaled slowly. Expecto Patronum. The air cooled. The lamps flickered. A pale glow gathered behind Harry's shoulders, and then stopped, not fizzled, not failed, stopped, like something on the other side of the spell had crossed its arms and refused. Harry's scar prickled sharply. For a heartbeat, the glow tried to form a shoulder, the hint of a giant silhouette. Then it cracked, not in sound, but in feeling. A jagged fracture in the intent. The room's temperature dipped too fast. Harry's fingers went numb. Dumbledore moved instantly, voice firm. "Harry." "Release," Harry tried. The cold clung. For the first time since the Dementor corridor, Harry felt the edge of wrongness, like winter without purpose, ice without a line to hold. Dumbledore flicked his wand and warmth rolled through the space in a controlled wave, not fighting Harry's magic but steadying it, giving it a place to settle. The cold loosened. Harry's breath came out in a harsh fog. He lowered his wand, pulse too loud in his ears. Dumbledore studied him. "Did you feel it?" Harry swallowed. "It refused." Dumbledore nodded once. "Yes." Harry's jaw tightened, anger trying to rise. "It's my Patronus." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened, gentle but unyielding. "It is your protection," he corrected, "not your trophy." Harry didn't like being corrected, but his scar still tingled, and his numb fingertips reminded him of the cost. Dumbledore continued, "A Patronus is not a weapon you wield. It is a truth you embody. When your truth is protection, and you try to summon it for anything else, curiosity, pride, fear of being controlled, your magic becomes unstable." Harry stared at his own hand, flexing it until feeling returned. "So I can't call it unless—" Harry began, "unless you are protecting." Dumbledore finished softly. Harry's chest tightened. The anchor rule. He hadn't named it, but he'd just learned it the hard way, and it made a cruel kind of sense the giant wasn't a servant. It was a vow that demanded honesty. Harry didn't sleep after that. He lay in bed under the lake's green light and listened to water pressing against glass like a slow, patient creature. He replayed the moment the glow had stopped. The refusal. It didn't feel like judgment. That was worse. At some point near dawn, he drifted, not into normal sleep, but into something colder and clearer, a dream that didn't blur at the edges. He stood on a plain of snow under a sky painted with pale aurora light. No castle, no torches, no warmth, just winter and footsteps, slow, heavy, certain. Harry turned. The frost giant stood in the distance, taller than any mountain shaped from ice and starlight. It didn't loom like a threat, it stood like a fact. Harry's breath fogged, but he wasn't freezing. The cold here didn't bite. It waited. The giant looked down at him, glacier eyes. Ancient. Watching. Harry didn't bow. He didn't flinch. He did what Hrafn taught him to do in storms: stand steady. "What are you?" Harry asked, and his voice didn't shake. The giant didn't speak with words. It spoke with weight, with feeling. Harry felt a memory that wasn't his, a wall of ice holding back blackness, a line of guardians standing until they cracked, a vow that wasn't written on parchment but carved into the bones of the world. Then the giant lifted one hand and pressed it to its chest. In the ice, runes flared, clean and bright like cracks filled with moonlight. They were not exactly Hrafn's runes, but Harry understood the idea. A name wasn't a sound, a name was a meaning. The runes burned into Harry's mind in 3 beats. Shield. Walks. Endures. Harry swallowed, his throat tight. "Shield? That walks?" he whispered. The giant's eyes narrowed slightly, as close as something that ancient could come to approval. Then the dream shifted. Harry saw himself in the corridor again, miles behind him, Dementor ahead, and he saw a second truth layered under the first. If Harry stood to protect, the giant came. If Harry stood to prove himself, the giant refused, a vow that could not be bent without breaking. Harry opened his eyes in the dormitory, heart steady, mind cold and clear. He sat up. His scar tingled faintly, not in pain, in warning, or recognition. "I know your name." Harry whispered into the green, lit dark. He didn't say it like an owner. He said it like a promise. The opportunity to test that promise came sooner than Harry wanted. It was later that day, between classes, when the castle's warm lie cracked again. Harry was cutting through a side corridor when he heard it, a sound like choking breath. Not a laugh, not a whisper, a struggle. He moved without thinking, because that was what his body did when the small were in danger. He rounded the corner and found two older students, third years, crowding a first year against the wall, not Miles this time. A tiny Ravenclaw girl with streaked cheeks and a wand clutched wrong in her shaking hand. One of the older boys had his wand raised, grinning. "Let's see if you can cast something useful," he sneered. "Go on, little bird. Do it." The girl's lips trembled. Please." Harry's voice cut through the corridor, calm and sharp. "Step away." Both older students turned. They saw Harry. They saw his scar. Their grins faltered, only slightly, like bullies realizing they might have chosen the wrong prey. "Oh," one of them said, forcing a laugh. "Look, it's the Winter Freak." Harry didn't react to the words. Words were cheap. Intent mattered. He stepped closer, placing himself between them and the girl without drama. "Leave," Harry said. The older boy raised his wand a little higher, trying to reclaim the feeling of power. "Or what? You'll summon your monster." Harry felt the urge rise, the old, hot urge to prove. He crushed it. Because he understood now proving was how you lost the giant. He glanced back at the trembling girl. Small, cornered, afraid. He breathed slow. The air cooled, not as a threat, but as a settling. Snow falling in the mind. The older boy's smile faltered further. Harry lifted his wand. He didn't reach for pride. He reached for protection. "Expecto Patronum," he said softly. The corridor filled with pale blue-white light. This time the glow didn't hesitate. It rose behind Harry like a sunrise made of winter. A shoulder formed, an arm, a towering silhouette that made the stone corridor feel suddenly too small for the truth stepping into it. The frost giant didn't fully manifest. Harry didn't need that scale, but it was there unmistakably. And the older boys stepped back without meaning to, their bodies remembering what prey remembered when a predator walked in. Not a predator of flesh, a predator of fear. The giant's presence pressed down like a fortress wall being set into place. The older boys' courage collapsed. Their wands dipped. "Merlin," one whispered. Harry's voice stayed calm. "Go." They went. Not because Harry threatened. Because something ancient behind him made the word no feel final. When they were gone, Harry turned to the girl. The frost giant's light softened slightly as if listening. Harry lowered his wand. The glow faded like snow melting under gentle sun. The girl stared at him with wide eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Harry nodded once. He didn't know what to do with gratitude. It always felt like a debt. He started to walk away. Then he paused, just for a heartbeat, and looked down at his own hand. Still warm enough, still steady. The cost had been measured. Not his whole fortune, just enough coin to hold the line. And in the quiet after, Harry felt it again. Faint, deep, approving shield that walks, not owned, not controlled, answered. Hogwarts didn't announce the start of a battle. It didn't ring bells or wave flags. It just changed. Harry felt it in the spaces between noises, the way laughter didn't quite rise as high as usual, the way footsteps paused too often in corridors, as if the castle had placed invisible stones in everyone's path, the way the air tasted faintly metallic again, like a storm remembering itself. The Dementor incident had been handled. That was the word adults used when they wanted a problem to stop being visible. The ministry sent letters. The staff held meetings. Students were told to stay in groups. Curfew tightened. Handled. But fear, Harry had learned, didn't disappear when you told it to behave. Fear learned new routes. It crawled through cracks. And then, one afternoon between charms and transfiguration, the cracks finally widened. Harry was cutting through a side corridor when the first scream came. It wasn't loud. That was the terrifying part. It was thin and strangled, like someone's throat had been squeezed around the sound. Harry stopped immediately. "Breathe slow. Listen." There was a second sound, a scramble of footsteps, too many too fast. Harry turned and moved toward it. He didn't sprint. Sprinting meant panic. Panic meant mistakes. But he moved like a knife being drawn. As he approached the next intersection, he felt it. A pressure in the chest, a heaviness slipping under his ribs like cold water. It wasn't as deep as a Dementor's presence. It was manufactured, a spell that imitated despair the way a mask imitates a face. Harry rounded the corner. Students filled the corridor in a knot of chaos. First, years, and second, years mostly. Faces pale, eyes wide. Some cried. Some stood frozen as if their limbs had forgotten they belonged to them. One boy had slid down the wall and sat with his knees hugged to his chest, rocking as if trying to keep himself from shattering. A fourth-year prefect shouted at them to move, but his voice broke halfway through the command, cracking into fear. At the center of it all, a section of air looked wrong. Not a creature, not smoke, a mist, thin and gray, curling at ankle height and spreading like spilled ink. It didn't climb, but it didn't need to. It touched skin and thoughts and turned both into lead. Harry's scar prickled. Not in recognition like the Dementor. In warning, this wasn't the same hunger. This was a weapon. A girl stumbled forward gasping, I can't breathe. Harry stepped into the crowd, voice calm and sharp. Back. Everyone back. No one listened. Fear made people deaf. Harry didn't waste words. He raised his wand and pushed the air into white silence, not to mute screams, to thicken the space, like snow falling hard enough to make the world slow down. The corridor dulled. The echo of crying softened. The stampede of footsteps became heavier, less frantic, as if the castle itself had wrapped a hand around the students' shoulders and forced them to feel their bodies again. The mist didn't vanish, but it hesitated. Harry breathed. Slow in, slow out. The numbness crept into his fingertips. Heat debt, collecting interest. He didn't let it distract him. Move away, he said again, quieter now, but the quiet carried. The white silence made his voice feel like it had weight. Students nearest him blinked, as if waking. A couple stumbled backward. The mist crawled forward anyway, patient and steady. Someone behind Harry whispered, "It's coming." Harry turned just enough to see Miles at the edge of the crowd, shaking. Miles's eyes were locked on the mist like he expected a hooded thing to glide out of it. Miles didn't scream this time, he just looked like his heart was trying to claw out of his chest. Harry's jaw tightened. Protect the small. He stepped closer to the mist. The despair pressure deepened, trying to wedge itself into his thoughts. Not his worst memories this time, something more subtle. A voice without words, why bother? It won't matter. You can't hold forever. Harry felt anger spark. He crushed it. Anger was fuel for fracture. He chose the vow instead. He lifted his wand and formed a rhyme ward. A plane of pale blue, white shimmered into being, spanning the corridor like a door made of ice light. Thin, controlled, deliberate. The mist touched the ward, and stopped. It didn't burn away. It pressed, testing. The ward flexed like ice under weight. Harry's teeth clenched. His fingers numbed faster. The students behind him whispered, but it sounded distant through the white silence, like voices under snow. Harry held the ward anyway. Because now the fear wasn't just in the air. It had become a line, and Harry understood lines. Lines were where you decided what you were willing to pay. A voice cut through the dulled noise, sharp, adult, furious. What is going on here? A professor shoved through the crowd. The moment she saw the mist and the ward, her face tightened. Harry didn't relax. Adults didn't always make things better. Get them out, Harry said without looking back. Now? The professor bristled, then seemed to recognize the tone. Not disrespect. Tredge, she spun and began ordering students away, voice snapping with authority. The crowd started moving, slowly at first, then faster. The corridor cleared enough that Harry could see the far end. And something else. Someone. A figure stood at the intersection beyond the mist, half, hidden, as if they'd stepped back when the ward went up. A student? A cloak? Hard to tell through the gray curl of spell smoke. Harry's eyes narrowed. The figure turned and slipped away. Harry's instincts flared. A trap, a test. The mist wasn't here to hurt random students. It was here to draw him out. Harry stayed where he was. He didn't chase. He held the line. The mist pressed harder against the ward, as if offended by being stopped. Harry's vision swam slightly. Cold crawled up his wrist. His wand hand trembled. He could feel the giant behind the spell, distant, watchful, like the edge of a mountain just beyond fog. Not yet, not for this. Not for pride. Harry forced his breath slow, and in his mind he pictured something Hraf had shown him once, a glacier. A glacier didn't fight the mountain. It waited. It held. It moved one grain at a time, unstoppable because it refused to hurry. Harry held the ward. The mist shuddered. And then, like a wave losing patience against a cliff, it split, peeling back and flowing sideways into the walls, dissipating as if its caster had pulled it away. The pressure in Harry's chest eased. The corridor warmed by a fraction. The ward vanished when Harry released it, and warmth tried to creep back into his numb fingers like a slow apology. Harry exhaled. For one heartbeat, he thought it was over. Then a second scream came, farther away, a different corridor, and then a third, and a fourth. Not one event, multiple, like someone had thrown fear, bombs through the castle corridors and was watching where students ran. A siege, not with fire, with panic. Harry turned toward the sound before the professor could stop him. "Potter!" she snapped. Harry didn't slow. He didn't look back. He moved toward the screams because that was what his body did when danger spread. Protect the small. The second corridor was worse. Not because the mist was thicker, because it had cornered people. A cluster of students huddled near a staircase, unable to climb. Their legs shook too hard. A couple had dropped their wands and stared at them like the wood had betrayed them. At the center stood a third-year boy with his wand raised, face blank with fear. He wasn't casting, he was locked. A spell had trapped his mind in something ugly and private, and it was eating him from inside. The gray mist curled around his ankles like a leash. Harry assessed in one glance. The mist didn't just spread despair, it fed on it. And the boy was being used as an anchor. Harry stepped forward, low and steady. "Look at me." The third year's eyes didn't focus. His breath came out in shallow, jerking pulls. Harry felt the pressure pushing at his own thoughts again. It won't matter. You can't hold forever. Harry swallowed hard and kept walking. He could do the ward again. But if the mist was anchored, the ward would just delay. He needed to break the anchor. He needed to free the boy. Harry formed white silence in the corridor, not wide this time, tight and targeted. Like snow packing around a single flame, controlling the air so the panic couldn't ricochet and multiply. The students behind him quieted, confusion breaking through fear. Harry reached the third year and saw tears tracking down his cheeks. The boy's mouth moved soundlessly. Harry leaned close enough to hear the whisper that escaped. "Dad," the boy rasped. I'm sorry." Harry's chest tightened. The mist was forcing him to relive guilt. Harry didn't have time to untangle guilt with words. He lifted his wand and used frost grip, not on the boy, but on the mist's edge where it clung to him. Cold pressure tightened like a firm hand. The mist hissed, no sound, just the sensation of something resisting. Harry pushed. The numbness hit his fingers like a bite. His vision blurred slightly. Heat debt. Paying. The mist loosened. The boy's shoulders jerked as if a rope had been cut. His eyes snapped into focus, wide and horrified. He stumbled back, gasping, and the mist wavered, its anchor gone. Harry didn't give it a chance to find another. Rhyme ward. A fast, clean plane of ice, light cut the corridor in half, separating the students from the thinning cloud. The mist slammed into it weakly, then, like smoke blown away by a door opening, peeled back and dissipated. The pressure eased. The students breathed again. A few started crying for real this time, not trapped in magical despair, just the normal relief of still being alive. Harry lowered his wand, swaying slightly. Someone grabbed his elbow. He turned, ready to lash out. It was the third year, face pale, eyes shaken. "Thank you," the boy whispered. Harry nodded once. Gratitude was still a strange thing, but he was learning, slowly, that gratitude wasn't always a debt. Sometimes it was proof that your line held. Harry looked down the corridor. The gray was gone, but he could feel it elsewhere, like cold drafts through castle cracks. Someone was moving through Hogwarts, casting fear, watching reactions, and Harry had just shown them something important. His magic could counter despair. Not by burning it away, by refusing to let it pass. A fortress. A problem. Harry's scar prickled faintly again. Not recognition. Anticipation. By the time teachers began sweeping corridors in organized groups and students were herded into common rooms, Harry had stopped 3 more pockets of mist. Each time he paid. Numb hands, shivering legs, a thin ache behind his eyes. He kept breathing slow. He kept spending measured coins, but even measured coins ran out. By early evening, He stood in a quiet stairwell with his back against stone, forcing warmth into his fingers by rubbing them together. His breath fogged faintly. Not because the air was cold, because he was. Footsteps approached. Harry straightened immediately, wand ready. A tall Aura's voice came from the landing above, calm as ever. I figured I'd find you somewhere that smells like stubbornness. Harry looked up. Kingsley leaned on the railing, eyes studying Harry without judgment. Harry didn't relax, but some tension shifted in his chest. Kingsley didn't feel like a collector. He felt like someone who understood storms. You're not supposed to be in student areas, Harry said. Kingsley's mouth twitched. And you're not supposed to be doing what you did today. Harry rubbed his fingers again. Someone had to. Kingsley descended the steps slowly, stopping a few feet away. Close enough to talk, far enough to respect space. That mist, Kingsley said, voice low, was not a Dementor. Harry nodded. I know. It mimicked the effects. Kingsley continued, which means whoever cast it has studied Dementors. Or despair magic. Harry's jaw tightened. So they were testing. Kingsley watched him carefully. Testing what happens when you're stretched thin. Harry's scar pulsed faintly. Kingsley's eyes narrowed. And you're learning too. Harry didn't answer. Kingsley continued, you've got control. But control isn't enough if someone learns how to tilt you. Harry's throat tightened. Tilt me. Kingsley's voice lowered further. You're strongest when you're protecting. You're weakest when you're trying to prove you can't be controlled. Harry's fingers froze mid-rub, because that was exactly what the mist had whispered. You can't hold forever. It had tried to bait him into pride. Kingsley leaned in slightly. Whoever did this, if they're smart, they won't come at you like a duelist. Harry's eyes sharpened. How will they come? Kingsley's gaze was steady, almost grim. They'll come through someone you can't ignore, he said. Harry's chest tightened. Miles, the Ravenclaw girl. The frightened boy in the corridor, any of them. Kingsley straightened. Get some rest. You'll need it. Harry's voice came out rougher than he intended. What if it happens again tonight? Kingsley's expression softened just a fraction. Then we handle it. Together. Harry didn't like relying on others, but his fingers still ached with cold, and his body felt like it was made of snow held together by stubbornness. Measured coins. Not the whole fortune. Harry nodded once. Kingsley paused, then said quietly, one more thing. Harry looked up. Kingsley's eyes were serious. If someone tries to make you angry, really angry, remember what you learned? Harry's scar tingled sharply. Kingsley held his gaze. Your giant answers protection, not rage. Harry swallowed. Because somewhere deep in him, under the vow, was another truth he didn't like to look at. When you were raised by endings, rage could feel like heat, and heat could feel like power. Kingsley turned and walked away, leaving Harry alone with the stairwell's quiet and the cold in his bones. Harry pressed his head back against stone and closed his eyes for one breath, then another. He pictured a glacier again, slow, unyielding, honest, and he promised himself, quietly, fiercely, if someone tried to turn his protection into a weapon, they would learn what winter did to those who mistook it for a monster. The first sign something was wrong wasn't a scream. It was warmth. Harry noticed it the way he noticed everything that didn't fit. Like a loose stone in a path you'd walked 100 times. The Slytherin common room was usually cool, the air always carrying the lake's slow breath. But tonight the warmth sat in corners, thick and unnatural, like someone had poured comfort into the room and expected it to behave. Comfort didn't behave. Comfort was bait. Harry sat at the edge of the room with his book open and his mind elsewhere, watching the fire that wasn't supposed to burn this strongly in a dungeon. Shadows flickered too sharply against the walls. A couple of students laughed too loudly, like they were trying to prove to the air that nothing frightened them. Harry didn't laugh. He waited. And then the note arrived. Not by all. Not slid under a door. It appeared on the table beside his elbow like the air had learned how to fold itself into paper. Harry's fingers hovered over it without touching. Ink, black and neat. Teotich ka urtrd, lh kiant biri. No name, but Harry didn't need one. His stomach tightened around a single, cold certainty. Miles Avery. Harry stood so smoothly no one noticed him move. He tucked the note into his sleeve and walked out of the common room like he was going to the bathroom. His hand was already on his wand. He moved through corridors without sound. Breathe slow. Panic kills. The castle was quiet in the way a forest got quiet when a predator entered. Portraits watched him with wide painted eyes. The torches burned steady, but their light felt thinner than usual, like it was afraid to touch certain shadows. Harry didn't take the shortest route. He took the route with the most exits. He reached the courtyard doors and stopped with his palm on cold iron. He listened. At first, nothing. Faintly, breathing. Not normal breathing. Not sleeping breathing. Someone struggling to draw air through a chest that didn't want to obey. Harry pushed the door open. Night hit him like a slap. Not because it was cold. Because it was wrong. The courtyard was covered in frost. Not the gentle kind that formed on autumn mornings. This frost was aggressive, thick, bright, biting. It crawled over stone like it owned it. The statues were glazed in pale ice. The fountain at the courtyard center was a frozen jaw. Water caught mid-spill like a scream turned to glass. Harry's breath fogged instantly. His skin prickled. Heat dapped. His body whispered, too fast, too soon. But this wasn't his frost. He could tell. His magic felt like winter that stood for something. This frost felt like winter that wanted to hurt. A false winter. Harry stepped onto the courtyard stones. The cold pressed against his mind, not just his skin, a pressure behind his eyes. A whisper in the ribs. You can't hold forever. The same poison the mist had used. Only sharper now. More personal. Harry scanned the courtyard. At the far edge, near a stone archway, a figure lay curled on the ground. Small? Shaking, Harry moved in a straight line. Not rushing, not hesitating. As he approached, he saw the boy's face. Miles's eyes were half open, unfocused, tears frozen at the corners. His lips were blue. His hands clawed at his own throat like he was trying to pull the air back into himself. Around him, the frost formed a circle. Not random, deliberate. Thin, glowing lines traced across stone. Symbols that weren't Hogwarts wards. Not the way Hogwarts wrote magic. They were instructions. Harry crouched and felt the air with his instincts. A spell anchored to the courtyard itself. A despair, pressure tied to cold, feeding on panic, tightening around lungs. A trap built to make someone suffocate slowly while the castle watched and did nothing because no one knew where to look. Harry swallowed hard. Protect the small. He raised his wand. He didn't speak. He breathed. White silence rolled out. Tight, controlled, wrapping around Miles like a blanket made of snow, muffling the panic spirals before they could multiply. Miles's shaking eased. Just a fraction. Harry's fingers went numb. He didn't stop. He formed a rhyme word in a half, dumb over Miles, thin blue, white, shimmering like ice light. The despair, pressure hit the ward and bent away. Miles gasped, a ragged, painful inhale. Harry didn't relax. He pressed his free hand to Miles's shoulder, grounding him the way Hraf had grounded Harry. Breathe slow, Harry said, voice low and steady. Out. Slow. Miles's chest hitched, then barely. Found a rhythm. Harry kept the ward up. Cold crawled up his wrist like a debt collector. He paid, measured coin. Not the whole fortune. Then a laugh echoed across the courtyard. Not loud, not dramatic. A soft sound like someone enjoying a private joke. Harry's head snapped up. Atop the steps leading back into the castle stood a figure in a cloak that looked like shadow. The hood hid their face, but Harry could feel their attention like a hand pressing on his forehead. The figure lifted a wand slightly, casual as a person lifting a cup. The frost circle around Miles flared brighter. Miles choked again, breath stuttering. Harry's jaw clenched. The figure spoke, voice muffled, older than a student, amused like a person who enjoyed watching systems fail. Look at you, it said. Always standing in the way. Harry didn't answer. He adjusted the ward, strengthening the curve where the pressure pressed hardest. His knees trembled. The figure's laugh came again, and this time it carried something sharper. You think you're a shield, it said, but shields break. Harry's scar prickled. Not pain. Warning. Harry forced his breath slow. You put him here, Harry said, voice even. The figure tilted its head. I invited you. He was simply the letter opener. Miles made a thin sound of fear. Harry tightened his hand on Miles's shoulder. "It won't work," Harry said. "I can hold." The figure's wand lifted slightly higher. The courtyard's frost deepened. Ice crept up the fountain like a living thing. The air got so cold Harry's teeth threatened to chatter. "You can hold?" The figure agreed lightly. For a minute, Harry felt anger flare. Hot and immediate, a stupid, tempting warmth inside the cold. Heat, power, a dangerous lie. The figure's voice softened as if speaking to something inside Harry rather than to Harry himself. "Does it make you tired?" it asked, being good. Harry's fingers tightened. "It makes you tired, doesn't it?" The figure continued, circling words like wolves. "When everyone stares at you and decides what you are. When they call your protection monstrous. When they sit in warm rooms and tell you to smile like a hero." Harry's scar pulsed. The pressure behind Harry's eyes intensified. The courtyard shifted in his perception, stone becoming ash, frost becoming drifting snow through smoke. For one heartbeat, he wasn't in Hogwarts. He was back in the end. The figure's voice went even softer. "You survived Ragnarok," it murmured. "You were forged there. And still they want you to be their pretty story, their obedient light." Harry's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Miles gasped again, and the sound snapped Harry back. Harry looked down at Miles, small, shaking, alive only because Harry stood here. Protect the small. That was the truth? The figure sighed, theatrically bored. "Fine," it said. "Let's see the giant again." The words slid into Harry like a hook, because some part of him, the oldest part, the part built from ash and winter, wanted that, wanted the scale, wanted to prove, once and for all, that no one could corner him, wanted to make the watching world afraid enough to stop trying to own him. Harry felt that urge rise. "Hot, bright, wrong," he heard Dumbledore's voice from memory. "Your giant answers protection, not rage." He heard Kingsley's voice too. "Make sure it stays yours." And he heard Raph Power answers to intent. "Always." Harry swallowed, breathing slow through clenched teeth. The figure laughed again, sensing the struggle. "Oh," it purred. "You're hesitating," Miles wheezed. Harry's eyes flicked to Miles's face, blue lips, watery eyes, chest fighting for air. The trap was tightening. Harry didn't have time. He needed more power, more presence, more. Harry raised his wand. "Expecto Patronum," he said, voice low. The air cracked. Blue. White light surged behind him. Fast, hungry, eager. A silhouette rose, taller than the courtyard's archways should allow, as if reality was making room out of fear. The frost giant began to form, and Harry felt it immediately. Not approval, attention, like ice forming too quickly, like a glacier trying to move like a wave, because beneath Harry's protection was something else now, a second intent. Make them afraid, make them stop, punish the one who did this. The giant's glow sharpened. Runic lines flashed too bright, too jagged. The air dropped so suddenly the courtyard stones cracked. Ice exploded outward in spiderweb patterns. Miles screamed, thin, raw, because the surge of cold punched through the space around him, stealing breath again. Harry's eyes widened. No, Harry tried to steady it, tried to drag his intent back to protection. But the false winter was pressing, and the cloaked figure was feeding the anger like bellows feeding fire. "Good," the figure whispered. "Yes, show me what you are." The frost giant's form fractured mid-birth. A shoulder formed and split. An arm formed and grew jagged, edges like broken ice. The giant's face flickered, glacier eyes turning sharp, then hollow, then sharp again, as if the spell didn't know which truth it belonged to. The courtyard filled with a sound like cracking lakes. The giant's presence became oppressive, not protective fortress, but uncontrolled winter storm. Harry's fingertips went dead numb. His knees buckled. Heat dead hit him like a hammer to the chest. He felt himself slipping, not into sleep, but into that dangerous thin place where your body stopped caring whether you lived. And through the haze, he heard Miles cough, wet, panicked. Harry forced his eyes open wider. Miles was freezing. Not metaphorically, physically. The false winter and Harry's fractured winter were stacking, turning protection into collateral damage. Harry's stomach twisted with horror. "I'm hurting him." The figure's laugh rose, delighted. "There it is. The truth. You're not a shield." Harry tried to speak, tried to pull the giant back. But the fractured Patronus surged again, uncontrolled, ice light lashing across the courtyard like it was searching for something to punish. It struck the stone near the cloaked figure, and the figure flicked its wand lazily. The ice light shattered against an invisible barrier. The figure didn't even flinch. It had wanted this. It had wanted Harry to break his own vow. It had wanted Harry to fear himself. Harry's vision tunneled. His breath came out in harsh fog. He tasted iron. His wand felt too heavy. And then a new voice cut through the courtyard like a clean blade. "Harry!" A burst of warmth swept across the stones. Not heat, but steadying energy, pushing back the worst of the cold without fighting it head-on. The fractured giant flickered. Its jagged edges hesitated. Harry turned his head, blinking through frost in his lashes. Hermione Granger ran into the courtyard, hair wild, wand raised, face pale with fear and fury. Behind her, moving like calm given human shape, was Kingsley Shacklebolt, cloak snapping, wand already in hand. Hermione's eyes went to Miles, and she made a sound like she'd swallowed panic. She ran to him immediately, dropping to her knees, hands shaking as she cast warming charms, quick, practiced, desperate. Kingsley didn't go to Miles first. He went to Harry. Not to restrain him, to anchor him. Kingsley stepped into Harry's space with controlled confidence and put a steady hand on Harry's wand wrist. Firm, grounding, not fighting. "Breathe," Kingsley said. "Slow." Harry tried. His lungs fought. Kingsley's gaze locked on his. "Not rage," he said. "Not pride. Protection. Choose it." Harry's throat tightened. He looked at Miles, Hermione's hands moving fast, the boy shivering but breathing again. He looked at Hermione, small, furious, brave, protecting without needing to be asked. He looked at the fractured giant, jagged, unstable, dangerous. And he realized with sick clarity, the giant hadn't betrayed him. He had betrayed the vow. Harry's jaw trembled. He swallowed the anger like poison. He forced his mind back to one truth: keep them alive. Not punish. Not prove. Keep alive. Harry exhaled slowly. The fractured giant shuddered. Its jagged edges softened. Just a fraction. Kingsley's voice stayed steady. "Release it. Gently." Harry lowered his wand inch by inch, as if lowering something heavy that could crush someone if dropped. The giant flickered, once, twice, then dissolved into pale mist like snow blowing away, leaving behind shattered frost patterns on stone and a lingering cold that felt ashamed. Harry's legs gave out. Kingsley caught him by the shoulder and kept him upright. Harry's hands were so numb he couldn't feel his wand anymore. Hermione looked up from Miles, eyes bright with fear and anger. "What were you thinking?" She snapped, then stopped, because she saw Harry's face. Not a hero face, not a monster face. A boy who had almost hurt someone he'd sworn to protect. Harry couldn't answer, because the honest answer was too ugly to fit in words. Kingsley turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the courtyard steps. The cloaked figure was gone. Only faint frost remained where it had stood, too clean, too deliberate, like a signature. Kingsley's jaw tightened. "Whoever did this," he said quietly, "wanted you to lose control." Harry's voice came out cracked. "I did." Hermione's eyes widened. Harry stared at the stone, at the shattered ice lines, at the place where his vow had cracked. "I wanted them to stop staring," Harry whispered. "I wanted them to be afraid." Hermione's expression softened in a way that looked like pain. Harry shook his head slightly, a sharp motion. "That's why it broke." Kingsley didn't argue. He just said, low and firm, "That's why it will happen again." Harry's scar pulsed faintly, like it agreed. Hermione helped Miles to his feet, arm around his shoulders. Miles looked dazed, but alive. When his eyes met Harry's, there was fear there, and something worse. Confusion, as if Miles didn't know whether the giant had saved him, or nearly killed him. Harry's chest tightened. Protect the small. He had failed that rule for one moment, and the moment had almost cost someone's breath. Kingsley guided Harry toward the courtyard door. "Get him to the hospital wing," Hermione said, voice tight, still supporting Miles. Kingsley nodded once. As they crossed the threshold back into the castle's warmer air, Harry felt the false winter behind them fading like a lie that had done its work. But the damage remained. Not in stone. In Harry. Because now he knew what the enemy had figured out. You couldn't defeat his protection head-on. You could tilt it. You could twist it until it harmed the people it was meant to save. And if that happened... Harry swallowed, throat burning. If that happened, the wizarding world wouldn't need to invent a monster story. Harry would hand them one. In the hospital wing, the lights were too bright and the sheets were too clean. Harry lay on a bed with shaking hands and a body that felt hollowed out by cold. His wand sat on the bedside table like a thing he no longer trusted. Kingsley stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, expression unreadable. Hermione hovered near the doorway, pale and stubborn, refusing to leave even when the nurse tried to shoo her out. Miles was somewhere nearby, alive, warming, watched. Harry stared at the ceiling. He didn't want sleep. Sleep meant dreams. Dreams meant glacier eyes, and he didn't know if those eyes would look approving now or disappointed. Kingsley spoke quietly. Your Patronus didn't fail because it's dark. Harry didn't answer. It failed because you tried to use it as a weapon. Kingsley continued, even for a second. Harry's throat tightened. I didn't mean to. Kingsley's gaze sharpened. Meaning is irrelevant. Intent is everything. The words hit like a rune carved into bone. Intent. Price. Result. Kingsley leaned forward slightly. You've got something rare, kid. A protection that doesn't burn out fast. A protection that can hold lines. That scares people. Harry's voice came out thin. It chilled. Kingsley shook his head once. No. It should scare the people who hunt. Harry swallowed. Hermione stepped closer, voice softer than before. The giant, it listened to you in the corridor. It listened when you were protecting. Harry closed his eyes. He saw jagged ice light. He saw Miles choking. He saw the cloaked figure's amused tilt. Hermione's voice trembled just a little. So listen back. Next time? Harry opened his eyes. Next time. Yes, because there would be a next time. The false winter had been a message. A test. A promise. We know how to make you break. Harry turned his head slightly toward Kingsley. How do I stop it? He asked. Kingsley's gaze was steady and grim and honest. You don't stop them from trying, he said. You stop yourself from giving them the crack. Harry's fingers curled into the sheet. The vow wasn't broken, but it was bruised, and now he had to rebuild it stronger. Not as a wall made of pride, but as a fortress made of truth. Harry stared at his numb hands and whispered, barely audible, shield that. Walks. No light appeared. No giant rose. But in the silence, Harry felt something, deep, cold, watchful. Not approval, not refusal. Waiting. As if winter itself was giving him one more chance to choose what kind of protector he wanted to be. The morning after the false winter, Hogwarts felt like a person forcing themselves to smile through a bruise. The corridors were scrubbed clean. The courtyard stones were warmed. Professors spoke in calm voices that didn't quite reach their eyes. The ministry's presence thickened. More footsteps that didn't belong, more clipped conversations behind closed doors, more rules added like bandages over cracks. But fear didn't care about bandages. Fear cared about timing, and whoever had written the false winter knew Hogwarts' rhythm now, when students gathered, when teachers relaxed, when the castle's attention drifted. They chose dinner, because dinner meant one thing the attacker wanted more than anything: a crowd. The great hall looked normal when Harry walked in. Candles floated in their usual lines. The enchanted ceiling showed a calm night sky scattered with indifferent stars. House tables were packed with students, chatter rising like steam. Harry sat at the Slytherin table and ate slowly, listening. His body still remembered the cost. His hands still ached in the joints when the room got too warm. His fingers still tingled faintly as if cold had left teeth marks behind. Across the aisle at the Ravenclaw table, Miles sat rigidly with his food untouched. He looked smaller than usual, like the false winter had shrunk him. When Miles's eyes met Harry's, he flinched. That cut deeper than any ministry stare. Harry held the look anyway. Steady, not pleading, not demanding. Miles looked down first. Harry swallowed the tightness in his throat and returned to his plate. Protect the small, even when the small was scared of you. Especially then. The first candle went out without flickering, just gone. A clean absence of flame. A second candle died, then a third. The hall didn't notice at first because humans were loud creatures. They trusted their noise to keep darkness away. Then the temperature dropped, not sharply, just enough to make sleeves tugged lower, shoulders hunch. A few students glanced up, confused. A whisper ran through the air like a blade sliding from a sheath. It won't matter. Harry's spine stiffened. He didn't look at the ceiling. He didn't look for a source. He felt it in his ribs. Manufactured despair, not a Dementor's ancient hunger, something smarter and crueler. A spell built to spread through proximity, to feed on shared panic, to turn a crowd into a storm. Someone laughed softly from somewhere in the hall. The sound was swallowed immediately, muffled by thickening air, as if the castle itself tried to pretend it hadn't heard it. Harry's scar prickled. Warning. He pushed his chair back slowly and stood. Across the hall, professors were rising too, wands appearing in hands, faces tightening. But the spell was already moving. The gray mist didn't roll in as a visible cloud this time. It came as a feeling, a weight on the tongue, a cold pinch behind the eyes, a sudden certainty that every warm thing in your life was temporary and already leaving. Students started to shift, nervous laughter, confused looks. A first year dropped a fork and flinched as if it had screamed. Then someone began to cry, not loudly, just a small, helpless sound. And like blood in water, the despair spread. Chairs scraped back too fast. Conversation snapped into sharp edges. A boy stood up, face pale, and stared at nothing as if his worst memory had climbed out of his skull and was now standing in front of him. Harry saw the moment the spell caught fire. Not literal fire, panic fire. The kind that made bodies move without minds. He stepped onto the bench and raised his voice, not loud but precise. "Stay where you are." No one listened. Fear made people deaf. Harry breathed in, slow. He pushed his wand forward and cast white silence, not wide like a blanket over the whole hall, but in a controlled arc that spread from him like snowfall. The air thickened. Sound dulled. The sharp edges of panic softened, not erased but slowed, as if the world had been forced to move through heavy snow rather than sprint downhill into disaster. A few students blinked, suddenly aware of their own breathing again. Harry felt the cost immediately. Numbness crept into his fingers. Heat debt paying. Measured coin, he reminded himself. Measured coin, but the spell in the hall didn't stop. It pushed back, pressing despair into the spaces between hearts. You can't hold forever. Harry's jaw tightened. He scanned the hall. Not for the mist. He knew better now. He looked for the anchor. Spells like this needed a root. And there, near the staff platform, he saw it, a thin frost line crawling across the stone floor, almost invisible in the candlelight. Not natural, not random. It formed a circle. A familiar circle. Runes embedded in ice like instructions. The anchor wasn't a person this time. It was the hall itself. Someone had turned Hogwarts' gathering place into a trap. Harry felt a flare of rage. Hot tempting. He crushed it so hard it hurt. Not rage. Not pride. Protection. He jumped down from the bench and moved through the frozen, sluggish crowd, white silence holding just enough space for him to pass. Students stared at him with wide eyes as he went. Some frightened, some desperate, some clinging to him like a lighthouse in fog. He didn't stop. If he stopped, the line would break. He reached the edge of the frost circle. Cold rose from it like breath from a grave. His scar pulsed. A whisper crawled across the stone show them. Harry's wand hand trembled. The temptation returned, prove, punish, display. He breathed slow until the tremble steadied. Then he did the only honest thing left. He knelt at the edge of the circle and placed his palm flat on the stone. The frost bit his skin instantly. He ignored it. He closed his eyes and pictured one thing, a crowd of students, small, messy, loud, alive. He pictured them walking out of the hall tonight. He pictured their breath in cold air, proof that despair had not stolen them. Protect the small. Protect the many. Harry rose. He lifted his wand. And this time, he didn't try to summon light, the way Hogwarts expected. He didn't try to force joy he didn't have. He called the vow by its true name. Shield? That walks. Harry whispered, not as an order, but as a promise. Stand. Expecto Patronum. The air cracked like a lake freezing solid. Pale blue, white light surged, not jagged, not frantic, calm, heavy, certain. A presence rose behind him, and the entire great hall seemed to exhale in shock as it realized something enormous had just stepped into the room. The frost giant manifested fully. It didn't squeeze itself into the space like a monster crammed into a cage. The space made room. The ceiling's starry illusion rippled, as if the magic holding it up had to negotiate with something older. Candles flared, then steadied, bowing their flames away from the giant's radiance. The giant stood tall, shoulders broad as a gate, body carved from moonlit ice and aurora glow. Runic lines flowed along its arms and chest like rivers of cold light, clean, deliberate, stable. Its glacier eyes swept over the crowd, not with hunger, with assessment, like a fortress checking its walls. The despair pressure slammed into the giant's presence and broke. Not exploded, broke, the way a wave broke against cliff stone. Students gasped as if waking from underwater. Some stumbled, blinking, confused. Others cried harder now, not from despair, but from the sudden release of it. The frost circle on the floor flared, angry, trying to assert itself. The giant moved one step forward. Stone frosted beneath its foot in a perfect pattern, runic, controlled, like winter writing law. The anchor's frost hesitated. The giant raised one hand, not a fist, a palm, and pressed it outward, as if pushing an invisible wall into place. A vast rime-ward spread across the hall, an enormous, shimmering plain of ice, light that curved like a dome over the students, separating them from the despair spell's pressure. Harry felt the cost hit him in a wave. Cold clawed up his arms, into his shoulders, into his chest. Heat debt demanded payment for scale. His vision blurred slightly at the edges. His knees trembled. He didn't let them buckle. Because the giant wasn't doing this alone. It was answering him, and he could not afford to lie to it. Harry forced his breath slow and spoke through clenched teeth, not to the crowd, not to the professors, but to himself. Keep them alive. The giant's glow steadied, so solid it looked like it could be touched. The despair spell strained, pushing harder. The frost circle tried to spread. The giant took another step, advancing without hurry. It didn't attack. It displaced. It pressed its presence into the space until the false winter had nowhere honest to stand. The frost circle shrank. Runes flickered. Then, with a sound like glass giving up, the anchor shattered. Ice lines cracking and evaporating into harmless mist. The pressure in the hall collapsed. Warmth rushed back like breath after drowning. And somewhere near the far end of the room, Harry heard that soft laugh again, muffled now, retreating. A shadow moved between students. A cloak. A slip of darkness. Gone, but it left one last whisper behind, thin as frost. Good boy. You chose the cage this time. Harry's teeth clenched. He didn't chase. Chasing was pride. Chasing was how you lost the line. He held the giant. He held the dome. He held the room together while the teachers moved. Spreading, checking students, casting counter, charms, calling names. The giant stood like a living wall until the last trembling first year stopped shaking. Until the last wide-eyed second year swallowed and remembered how to breathe. Until the small were small again, not prey, just children. Then Harry finally let himself release, not abruptly. Gently. Thank you, he whispered, barely audible. The giant looked down at him, glacier eyes deep and unreadable. Then it dissolved into pale aurora mist, fading like snowfall in moonlight. The rime ward vanished. The candles steadied. Normal returned in pieces. Harry swayed. Heat debt arrived to collect the rest. His fingers went numb so fast he dropped his wand. He tried to bend to pick it up, and his legs gave out. He hit the stone floor hard enough to taste copper. Hands grabbed him immediately. Voices. Someone shouting for the nurse. Someone else calling his name. Harry couldn't focus. The hall's warmth felt far away. He was cold in a way blankets couldn't fix. But through the haze, he heard something that mattered. Miles's voice, small, shaking, but real. He saved us, Miles said. Not questioned, not rumor, statement. Harry tried to turn his head. Miles was pushing through the crowd toward him, face pale, eyes wide, but walking. Walking, breathing. Alive. Miles looked down at Harry, throat working like words were hard. Miles swallowed, then forced it out. I'm sorry. Harry's blurred eyes held him. Miles's voice trembled. I was scared of you. Harry's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but his jaw wouldn't cooperate. Miles continued anyway. as if he had decided fear didn't get to silence him tonight. But you still stood there, Miles whispered, even when it hurt you. Harry managed one rough breath. He didn't have strength for comfort, so he gave truth, always, he rasped. Miles nodded, a tiny, fierce motion. Then he stepped back as adults crowded in, lifting Harry carefully, voices urgent. Harry's eyes rolled shut as they carried him toward the hospital wing. He didn't dream on the way. He didn't have energy for it. But he felt, deep inside him, the steady weight of something ancient settling, not approval, not refusal, acceptance. He woke later to soft lamplight and the smell of potions. His whole body ached like he'd been hollowed out and filled with snow. The nurse's voice was distant, scolding someone. No visitors. Another voice cut in, calm and iron. He won't talk anyway. Let him see the faces. Harry opened his eyes. Kingsley stood near the bed, arms folded. Hermione sat on the chair beside it, hair messy, eyes red like she'd been angry and afraid for hours. McGonagall hovered behind them, expression tight but relieved. And Dumbledore sat at the foot of the bed, hands folded, gaze gentle. Harry swallowed. His throat was dry. Hermione leaned forward immediately. "You idiot," she whispered, but it didn't sound like insult. It sounded like relief wearing claws. "You held the whole hall." Harry's lips twitched faintly. Kingsley nodded once. "You did it right." Harry's fingers twitched under the blanket. "Hey," he started, voice hoarse. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "The one who cast it." Harry nodded slightly. "He was there," Harry rasped. "He left." Kingsley's jaw tightened. "We felt it." "Too late." McGonagall's voice was low. "Who would do this inside Hogwarts?" Dumbledore didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Harry, eyes very still. "You did not break tonight," Dumbledore said softly. Harry stared at the ceiling. "I almost did," Harry whispered. Dumbledore's voice remained calm. "And then you chose protection anyway." Harry swallowed hard. Because that choice had been the hardest thing he'd done since surviving the end. Kingsley stepped closer to the bed. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Harry's scar pulsed faintly. He didn't need to be told. Dumbledore spoke again, voice gentler than the truth he carried. "The wizarding world will continue to misunderstand you." Harry turned his head slightly, eyes tired. "Let them." Dumbledore's smile was small. "They will try to make you prove you are light." Harry's breath came shallow and fogless. "I don't have their light." Dumbledore nodded. "No." He leaned in just a fraction. "But you have something rarer." Harry blinked slowly. Dumbledore's eyes held his. "You have a light that holds." Harry lay in the hospital wing, exhausted to the bone, and felt, beneath the ache, beneath the fear, beneath the attention waiting like a predator outside the door. A steadier thing, a vow that didn't need applause. A protection that didn't need to look pretty. A truth shaped like winter. Cold, unbreakable, honest, and somewhere deep in that truth, a giant waited, not to be used, not to be displayed, but to stand. Whenever Harry stood for someone smaller than himself,